across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to the show. Happy Tuesday, wherever you are and whatever you're doing. It is a privilege and a pleasure to have your company on this fine morning. And we have a lot of things to discuss today, don't we? Andy Burnham's education plans, or ill-education plans, it seems to me. We also really need to talk about two-tierism when it comes to politics, because you will have known by now, you will have seen that Zach Polanski reposted a picture of a Green Party activist wearing a T-shirt with a guillotine saying "making plans for Nigel." Now, ask yourself this. If that had been the other way around, if it had been a Reform member who had worn that T-shirt and Nigel had retweeted it, making comments about Zach Polanski, there would have been absolute outrage. Anyway, I want to discuss the fact that we have a hierarchy in this country of the woke left who think they're top of the tree, and us righties, the evil ignoramus who should be stopped at any cost. They can say what they like about us, and yet who are the ones who are really under threat? Really, it's not that long since I lost my dear colleague Anne Widdecombe, and so I don't find this funny at all. But of course, if you're on the left, well, it was a joke. Oh, he didn't mean to repost it. This isn't inciting violence. No one needs to be investigated for this. We live in left-wing tyranny. We are essentially, well, they've got away with it for 20 years, haven't they? Demonising us, ostracising us, calling us names, gaslighting us, lying to us, taking away our language, preventing us having conversations about the major issues we see going on in this country. And so audacious are they now, so audacious are they now that I think we do live in left-wing tyranny. I don't know what the other word for it is. So we are going to be discussing that, of course. And yesterday there was a horrific knife attack in Paris, hot off the heels of that terror attack in Germany. A man shouting, "Allah made me do it." The police in France say they don't know his motivation. Anyway, there you go. Same day, no, different day, same sort of stories. Right. If you want to join in and talk with me at any point during the programme, the number is 03444 99 1000. It is the normal network rate for your telephone service provider. You can call that number at any time and we will take down your details and give you a call back when it is time to chat. Anyway, if you want to send a WhatsApp message, it's also to that number. You can leave me a voice note on that number. 87222 is the number if you'd like to send a text. If you're going to do that, write the word talk before you send your message. OK, let's kick things off with the brilliant Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Tom, what a perfect guest to have on a day where we're talking about, well, hypocrisy, to put it mildly. There are people out there going, well, you know, Nigel Farage is overreacting, reporting Zach Polanski to the police. I wish we didn't have to do this. I wish we didn't live in a culture where someone saying something insulting or wearing, you know, a horrible T-shirt ends up becoming some sort of hate crime. But we do now live in an era where, quite frankly, if you're a politician, particularly on the right wing, you are endangered.
Well, that's certainly true. And the horrific murder of Anne Widdecombe, still very much in our minds, shows what a serious time that we live in and how that kind of demonisation of politicians on the right has got to a real fever pitch. You're also absolutely right, Alex, about the hypocrisy. If this was Nigel Farage reposting this kind of message about Zach Polanski, if this was any figure on the political right, I think it would lead the news for days and days and days. The condemnations from all sections of the political media classes would be strong, and it could easily be the pretext of them being totally hounded out of public life. And of course, Zach Polanski himself is a total hypocrite on these questions. He was the only party leader, from what I remember, who backed the arrest of Graham Linehan at Heathrow Airport for jokey tweets about punching trans women in the nether regions, to put it delicately, at this time in the morning, even when the Labour Party was saying that that was an overreach and too far. But I think when it comes down to the question whether or not this should be a police matter, that's where I would make myself a little bit unpopular. I think that when we're talking about the police getting involved, we have to be talking about direct incitement to violence. It's not clear to me at all that's what has been met here. And whilst I think it can be tempting at times like this to say if there are these double standards and that therefore we should hold them to the standards that they've held us or they've held other sections of politics, I think that can quite quickly become a race to the bottom. So yes, Zach Plansky is banged to rights on being a massive flaming hypocrite, but should he be banged to rights in terms of the law? Not in my view, certainly if we want to maintain free speech across the board.
Yeah, no, I sort of tend to take your side on this one in all accounts. But I was thinking last night, I was lying in bed and I just couldn't sleep. And I was churning over everything going on. And I have come to the conclusion that the gravity of the situation we're in now is being massively underestimated. Because when I look back, and really ever since the Brexit referendum, if you were a teacher and you went into the staff room and said that you rather supported Brexit, you could bet your bottom dollar you wouldn't get spoken to, that you'd be denied a promotion if you wanted to become the head of a department. I mean, not even a teacher, anyone in almost any walk of life at work. Then we had the sort of debanking crisis. We have seen very clearly now that people on the right wing face death threats and violent attacks. I mean, I remember when I was a Brexit Party MEP having clumps of my hair ripped out just trying to get to an interview on College Green because the legacy media thought it was a great jamboree to erect scaffolding where all the protesters could stand around in their sort of, rag week costumes, hurling insults and abuse. And I had to have a police escort onto the grass. And even though there were police around me, they were spitting on me and pulling clumps of hair out from the scalp. And I look at where we're going with this, where we're not allowed the language to discuss the things that we can see very clearly going on, so much so that we even risk ending up being reported for hate crimes for talking about major issues facing society. I look at the wake of this horrible Berlin terror attack, and they've all turned around and said, oh, we stand in solidarity with LGBTQI+ and all the rest of it. No one's used the word Muslim. No one's used the word Islamist. Because we're not allowed to identify that what we have done is imported a lot of deeply dangerous, frankly feral men from foreign cultures who pose a direct threat to society, particularly women and girls, as has been reflected in Paris. I'm looking now at the sort of likelihood that Burnham will mess about with the plebiscite to try and enthrone the left wing of politics in power for futurity. And I just think, how on earth was it in the 1900s until the turn of the century we were fighting Islamism and fighting communism? Now we're in a situation where those two things are taking over the country, and I have just come to the conclusion that if you are on the right wing, you are probably one of the most persecuted people in society. You risk losing your job, you risk losing friends, you risk, being people informing on you to the police. I mean, the list goes on. It is beyond dystopian.
I think that's absolutely right. And the two-tierism that you point to is really quite profound. I mean, if you think about the sorts of things that would get you not just sacked or deplatformed, but actually a visit from the police in recent years, it's as simple as pointing out that there are men and there are women. And yet, when it comes to the other side of politics, suddenly everyone rediscovers their John Stuart Mill whenever Zach Plansky or someone else says something genuinely atrocious. That is something that, unfortunately, those of us who are either on the right or anti-woke or against whatever this thing is that has been ruling over society and public opinion for so long now have had to contend against. And I think particularly in the context of the horrific scenes that we've seen in Paris, that we've seen in Germany over the course of the weekend, you can't help but be struck by the fact that so much of the speech policing and the tone policing has been aimed at people who have been raising the alarm at precisely these threats, who have been saying that this rising radical Islam is a threat to not only social cohesion but life and limb in Europe, have been painted as bigots, have been painted as the extremists, and that whenever we see an attack like this, as kind of pockmarks recent history, then suddenly again you get the thought control, suddenly again you get the speech control. The word Islamist even is omitted from any of the warm words and tributes that emerge afterwards. So it is a very dystopian situation. It's a very Orwellian situation, not to overuse that term. We're not even allowed to describe the threat, let alone to rail against it, and that surely has got to stop.
But this is what I'm talking about. This isn't like a sort of light-hearted threat. This isn't, oh, we don't like the rainbow roundabouts or something like that. This is the mass importation of people who have been conditioned from birth, brainwashed into a death cult, who mean us harm, who have murderous intentions towards the citizens of Europe, who have extreme sexual perversions about the young women of Europe, who certainly don't want to contribute to society in any meaningful way. And governments will, you know, the left wing who talk about, oh, safe spaces, oh, I'm triggered, I need to go somewhere because I heard a word that made me feel like I, you know, couldn't go on with my day, you got my pronouns wrong. You know, they go on and on and on about all these so-called completely contrived, confected threats that, you know, making people lose sleep at night, which are invented to censor us, to silence us, to cancel us, to persecute us. And when we see probably the greatest threat any nation, any civilization can face, which is the importation of foreign enemies into the confines of its realm, that are plotting and actively meaning us harm and doing us harm, and we have to sit back and pretend that's not happening. Tom, I just think that this is crazy. Like 20 years ago, this wasn't the situation we were in. I don't remember this stuff. Yes, we had 9/11, but we took terrorism and Islamism very seriously. Now we have to pretend it doesn't exist. This whole huge uptick in extreme leftism of the most pernicious, horrible, insidious form, the sort that we would say, we would look at communist countries somewhere else in the world and say, that is human rights abuse. Well, we're living under it now. Well, I don't think that's an exaggeration. And because we're still not allowed to use the language we need to use and have an adult conversation about facts in front of our very eyes, and because I'm certain this Labour government are going to do everything they can to gerrymander the electoral system to try and stay in power, the lawfare being thrown, left, right and centre reform UK. I'm not saying that they should be exempt from scrutiny over their finances. Of course not. This is a democracy. Well, it used to be a democracy, but I think a lot of people out there probably don't trust the democratic system anymore. And so last night I just sat there and I thought, wow, if I were to write these things out on a piece of paper and hand them back in time to 30-year-old Alex 10 years ago and say, right, what country are you describing there? I would not have for a moment imagined Britain in 2026.
No, I couldn't put it better myself. And I think especially when you've had the left and the great and good running around so much over recent years and being supposedly petrified by this kind of phantom far right, that is the real threat to British society. That is the barbaristic, again, kind of challenge that is being posed to all that is good and holy about European countries. Meanwhile, you have the rise of jihadism, radical Islamic terrorism, a movement which surely better fits the characteristics of what they claim to be railing against, something which is deeply anti-Semitic, which is murderous, which believes in the subjugation of women and minorities, and yet they just stare into the middle distance, can't even use the word Islamism, and try to convince us that people who are putting flags up on lampposts are really who we should be concerned about. I mean, it would be funny if the stakes weren't so high, if it wasn't so deadly serious. And again, therefore, in that context, being able to push back, to argue against it is ever more important. But I think the difficulty is we've had a political establishment which, let's be honest, has been complicit in the rise of Islamism, has allowed it to happen, and then a radical left which has kind of joined forces with it because it sees some electoral and political potential by linking arms with some of the most backward and deranged movements on God's earth. So how we unpick that is a big challenge, but I think people, unfortunately, have to be a hell of a lot braver to push back against all of this.
And this is the problem. As predicted, there is a burn and bounce because we live in a clown world. We live in a sort of emoji-driven, meme-riddled, you know, vacuous vapid, pointless society now, where, you know, Andy for us and a cartoon face is all that's needed for people to go, well, he's nice, I'm going to vote for him. Have they forgotten that the Labour Party have just ridden roughshod over our liberties, over our prosperity, over our security, over our national integrity for the past 2 years? Apparently so, because people are just gobbling it down. You know, we live in such a puerile, facile world now that all someone needs to become popular is to wear a T-shirt, have a pair of glasses and talk about the word hope. And people go, yeah, I'm going to vote for him. Despite the fact that, you know, all the semi-halfway, incrementally step in the right direction plans of Shabana Mahmood to perhaps get, well, semi-sensible on immigration, which was making people wait 10 years for permanent settlement, he's going to just throw it all in the bin. In fact, this Prime Minister has said nothing about immigration, nothing about illegal immigration, nothing about the IRGC threat against the monarchy and Fairford, nothing particularly concrete on defence, but despite getting his photo shoot with Zelensky, all he's talking about are parochial mayoral issues, and quite frankly, our whole country is a dumpster fire right now, and the difficulty I have is there are way too many people out there who just go, yeah, this is nice, nothing to see here, we don't have any problems in Britain, let's vote for Andy.
Well, I think there probably always was going to be a Burnham bounce just because of how atrocious his predecessor was. I mean, it couldn't really get much worse. And so you do have someone come in who, even though he's been in politics for a very long time, appears a bit more like a clean skin, can speak human. I mean, this is a low bar, Alex, but this is what we've come to expect from a lot of sections of politics, certainly the Labour Party. But I think certainly where the challenges to the Labour Party are concerned, I think patience is a bit of a virtue. This was probably always going to take place. And for the reasons that you point to, whether it's about immigration, whether it's about defence, whether it's about energy, which is another thing that he's already started to flip-flop on to a certain extent, the issues that are really roiling society, that people are really feeling the effects of, that ordinary people are being forced to kind of pay the price for elite virtue signalling on migration or net zero, what have you. The Labour Party is still constitutionally incapable of dealing with those issues properly. As you say, it seems like Andy Burnham is going to water down what were already pretty piecemeal and limited reforms that Shabana Mahmood wanted to bring through. So, of course, timing is everything, but I think in time, Andy Burnham is going to be found out for precisely the reasons that we've been talking about. It's just something that will have to be a bit more of a waiting game, I dare say.
Can't come soon enough, because I feel I'm sitting here watching the destruction of my civilization, 2,000 years old, in real time. And I just don't think that's hyperbolic anymore. Oh, Tom, thank you ever so much. The brilliant Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Talking about all the mad things that are being unleashed on our society, Tom mentioned net zero there. We're going to be talking about that later, and how we could be facing blackouts because we just don't have the storage capacity, and certainly Europe doesn't, when it comes to potentially facing winter of fuel shortages. And not only that, well, let's just let out all the rapists and murderers onto the street while we're at it. It never ends. Anyway, we will be discussing the early release scheme after this break. Kemi Badenoch has come out swinging against it. Made a speech at 9:30 this morning, essentially wanting to legislate to stop the early release of dangerous criminals and rapists. I mean, what? Have we got to the stage that the opposition leader is saying, I'm going to have to try and introduce legislation so you don't let dangerous people roam the streets of Britain who should be in prison? Seriously, this is where we're at. Are we being run by mad people? Am I asleep? I can't make sense of this anymore. Anyway, we're going to be discussing that after the break. If you want to talk about any of these topics, I'd love to hear from you. 0344 499 1000 is the number for WhatsApp. You can leave a voice note on WhatsApp as well. 87222 is the number if you'd like to send a text. OK, right. On that note, let's take a short break and I'll see you on the other side.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Now, new Prime Minister. Of course, he's not even in London, is he? He's up in Manchester, working from home or whatever. Hundreds of miles away from the lobbyists, the lobby journalists, Whitehall, the other parliamentarians he might want to cross-examine what he intends to do now he's in charge of the country. But no, he's not recalling Parliament. Forget that. Don't need that. Let's just spend the summer figuring out how to, I don't know, add up the numbers for these wild policy pledges we're hearing squeaked out to fly him up the flagpole and see how the population reacts. Well, Kemi Badenoch has turned around and wants to see the recall of Parliament to introduce emergency legislation. OK, this is crazy, isn't it? To halt the early release of serious violent offenders, including rapists and killers. How the heck have we gotten to this point where this is requiring potentially emergency legislation? Like, why on earth would any civic-minded, sensible society even allow the early release of dangerous criminals? Let's speak now to barrister and former Attorney General Sir Michael Ellis-Casey. Michael, I know that we have huge problems with a lack of resourcing on the prison estate, staff shortages, a lack of places, a lack of cells, a lack of infrastructure, that these things, because of planning and all the rest and costs and expenses, they take time to build new prisons. But I still cannot fathom. I mean, the idea of the headline that the opposition leader wants Parliament to be recalled to put in emergency legislation to stop murderers roaming the streets, it is just dystopian beyond belief. How did we get here?
Well, Alex, you're absolutely right. It shouldn't be necessary for Kemi Badenoch to propose this emergency legislation, but it is necessary. And it's extremely urgent because in 5 weeks from now, on the 2nd of September, over 6,000 criminals are going to be released early from their prison sentences. And that includes 220 people convicted of raping children, 344 people convicted of raping adults, and 85 people convicted of killing someone in an act of manslaughter. What? Some of those people were sentenced to more than 10 years in prison, and they're going to be released at the halfway point earlier than had been anticipated, because it was supposed to be 2/3 before they were eligible for release. And that's going to happen because Labour has passed this legislation that now needs urgent repair. Andy Burnham said before he went up to Manchester, or while he was still in Manchester, he'd hardly been in London, he said that Labour had underperformed. Well, he was absolutely right about that, and they still are underperforming. The problem is, unless something's done in the next 5 weeks, these people are going to be released.
Surely there's something else that could be done. Surely that this would, I mean, this shouldn't even be a last resort. This shouldn't exist as any sort of resort at all. What about white-collar offenders? Well, I mean, I've heard people talking about how about releasing female prisoners because they usually do not pose a violent threat to society. And I don't understand why, you know, during COVID, we were banging on about building Nightingale hospitals, Nightingale courts. Why have we not been able to create basic prison spaces? You know, we're turning around to converting old military bases into migrant camps. I just don't understand why there isn't something quick, Alex, that we can do.
Because, first of all, there's been a lack of political will from the left-wing government, which is why, of course, they wanted to abolish jury trials in many cases as well. Their excuse was that it was going to free up prison places. Barristers like myself knew full well that jury trials have nothing to do with prison places. It won't help in any way, shape or form. It won't help delays in the court system. So there are things that can be done. There are 3 things immediately that can be done. One of the things the Tories proposed doing before they left office 2 years ago was renting prison places in other countries. Now, that was something Labour cancelled as soon as they came into power. But guess what? Sweden has actually done that. They're renting prison places in Estonia. So that's one of the things that you could do very quickly that would alleviate the problem of overcrowding in prisons. A second thing you could do is deport foreign offenders. We don't do it because we haven't stood up to those countries who have refused to take their own people back. We haven't threatened them with a loss of income from the vast amounts of international aid they receive from us. We haven't threatened them with visa sanctions. We just allow them to say, no, we don't have our prisoners back, thanks very much. And that then has a further problem. The third thing we need to do is create and build more prison places. You do it more quickly than before by cutting through some of the red tape, but also by building cheaper prison places to house less dangerous prisoners. They don't all need to be, with 4-foot thick walls and all the rest of it. Some prisoners can be housed, obviously the more minor offences, they can be housed in less expensive prisons. Those are the three things you need to do. It's quite simple, but instead, this government wants to just release people.
It's utterly abhorrent. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Looking that Sweden has overcrowded prisoners. What does Sweden have in common with us that Estonia might not? Oh, that's right. Porous borders and off-the-charts migrant crime. And, of course, at the moment, the Department of Justice are doing everything they can using lawfare to stop any sort of publication of the data on foreign nationals committing crimes. Sometimes I think this government actively wants to destroy the country, that there seems no other explanation. It doesn't make sense to me, though. I mean, the emergency legislation to repeal this letting out all the wrong-uns into society. Surely the Conservative Party should be tabling legislation to do some of the things that you're talking about there, especially, I would say, the deportation of foreign prisoners, because you're absolutely right. Under Ed Miliband, this government wants to increase international aid, wants to do trade deals usually involving huge visa relaxation schemes. That is incredible leverage for us. Why not table that legislation?
The problem is, Alex, that Parliament is in recess until the 1st of September, and this is due to happen on the 2nd of September. And obviously, the opposition parties, the Conservatives, don't have the votes. What did happen, though, a few days before Keir Starmer was kicked out of office, is that Kemi Badenoch introduced a motion in the House of Commons to abandon this early release scheme. She won that by over 100 votes, and that was because Labour backbench MPs were scared to vote against it because they know how bad it looks. But unless you actually get Parliament back in, only one person can request a recall of Parliament, and that's the Prime Minister of the day. So unfortunately, nobody else has that power. What Andy Burnham therefore needs to do is respond to Kemi Badenoch's demand to recall Parliament, to put through emergency legislation, and she said, look, the Tories will help Labour get this through if that's what you want to do. At the moment, if you don't do anything, this will happen, and it will be Andy Burnham's fault, whether he's in Manchester wearing a T-shirt or not.
The man's only been in office for about 2 seconds. I already think he's a disgrace. I've got to ask you about the furore surrounding the post or repost of Zach Polanski of a Green Party activist wearing a T-shirt featuring a guillotine saying, making plans for Nigel. Now, I'm not one to want to run off to the police and complain about things every 5 seconds that are offensive or even, this personally. Yet, this has come in the wake of a number of things. It's come in the wake of the jailing of people such as Lucy Connolly. There are still people in prison right now for social media posts, which to me is utterly insane. It's also come in the wake of the horrific slaughter, bludgeoning to death of my former colleague, Anne Widdecombe. And in the wake of this as well, Nigel Farage has revealed he has over 700 death threats every single month. I used to work with Nigel. I was his aide. I can well imagine that that is not remotely an exaggeration. We have two-tier. We've been talking about two-tier justice for a long time, and often we've regarded this as maybe it happens on racial lines. I think that the two-tierism in our society is between the left wing and the right wing. And anything goes if you're on the right wing. You can be treated however anybody sees fit. You can be sacked from your job for supporting Brexit, or you can be called a gammon, a Karen, you can be ostracised, you can be debanked, you can have threats made against you. At the same time, you can be reported yourself to police for saying hurty words on the internet. And then when people make indirect death threats about you, nothing to see here, it's all fun and games, isn't it? It's a bit of a laugh. What's your view on this?
Well, Alex, look, I've been in the criminal justice system my whole life, 35 years, and it gives me no pleasure to say that I do feel we have a two-tier justice system in this country at the moment, and that is a source of deep regret. The reason, I think you only need to look at one community, actually, to prove almost that there is a two-tier system, and that is how the Jewish community is treated when it comes to offences against them. We've seen multiple examples of those Saturday hate marches going on, nothing done about it for most of the past 3 years. In many cases, we've seen the Crown Prosecution Service failing to prosecute obvious cases like that. So I do fear that there are double standards that are applied. I think that it is this latest case, I think the police are investigating. They said last night that the Met Police are investigating this latest posting. And they are obviously trigger happy in many cases when it comes to prosecuting and arresting individuals for their social media posts. But I do think it's incumbent on politicians across the political spectrum to really be extremely cautious about what they post, because they really can't be surprised if they come a cropper with this sort of thing.
No, I totally agree. You know, I've concluded we essentially do live under stochastic terrorism right now. If you're disadvantaged, OK, due to your political persuasions, which I think on the right wing now we are, we're disadvantaged. You know, people on the right aren't going to be invited. I mean, Anne Widdecombe was on Strictly Come Dancing back in the day. They'd never have her on that now, ever. Do you know what I mean? You know, since Brexit, she'd never be invited onto that show. And I've laid out as well what happens with people who may no longer get a promotion, who may be ostracised, who may be reported to HR for, I don't know, saying that they like Reform UK. I've covered stories where foster children are taken away from families because the families are members of a certain political party. Surely if you are disadvantaged due to your political leanings, it's essentially a form of political persecution.
Well, Alex, we keep hearing, don't we, about diversity. We keep hearing about that type of issue, and we have done now for many years. What I think we don't ever hear about is diversity of thought, which is to your point about the metropolitan elite, the blob, if you like. Their worldview is definitely to the left of centre. What we need is more people who are in charge of these issues having some more diversity of thought, people who will be invited, you know, to take part in things, even though their views might be right-wing or right of centre. And as you absolutely say, there are many examples of people who have been excluded, especially from day-to-day life that's not in the public eye, because of their views. It's double standards.
It is. I just sort of think, you know, at what point do we acknowledge that we're sliding into a regime? You know, where is that fine line? All of a sudden it goes from a matter of sort of polite societal taste to all of a sudden, we're now living under a political system that in any other country we'd call tyranny. Oh, there you are. Sir Michael Ellis, KC, thank you ever so much. A real privilege to have you on the programme today. Your thoughts on these topics, please, because I honestly, I do think that, you know, with these things, it starts off slowly. You sleepwalk, you notice things going on, but the sort of tumble into the abyss always happens at an accelerated pace, far quicker than anyone anticipates. You just have to look at 1930s Germany to see that that is historically true. Right, 03444 991 the number to call. You can use that number as well to send me a WhatsApp or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. 8722 is the number to send a text. Right, the word talk. Before you send your message, we are back after this discussing the Islamist attack. It very much would appear to be an Islamist attack in Paris, straight after what's happened in Berlin. And also, we really need to talk about the fact that Iran have already invaded Britain. Big topics after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back. Now, I don't know why we have to go along with this ridiculous gaslighting, this censorship of reality, where you can see, I can see, we all can see that violent men brought up in authoritarian religious cultures, Islamist cultures, who have deeply disturbing attitudes towards women, but frankly, murderous, violent, savage attitudes towards anybody who hasn't been equally brainwashed into their death cult. Well, it's the equivalent, isn't it, of bringing an XL bully into a kindergarten. You wouldn't do it. You would say these people are incredibly dangerous. It wasn't that long ago. We had videos of ISIS beheadings and people being set fire to in cages, etc. Yazidi sex slaves. Barbarous practices going on in Syria. And we all went, whoa, that's scary, that's horrible. Whoa, these people being groomed online who are running off to go and join the caliphate. This is terrifying. Now it's as if we're not supposed to talk about it because we've invited exactly those same foreign, feral, irredeemable, irreparable. I'm sorry, when you're brought up under an authoritarian, brainwashed death cult, you can't suddenly transmogrify into a normal person. It's too late. It's too late. You're probably psychologically damaged for life. Funny, isn't it? The left love talking about that. Oh, generational pain, slavery reparations, oh, colonialism. You might want to apply the same attitudes towards long-lasting, irreversible mental, psychological damage to your mates coming from Islamist war zones. But we're not allowed to talk about this. Stabbing attack in Paris yesterday. A guy going on a rampage with knives attacked 3 women. It's always women. They want to kill the women. This is what the death cult is all about. Deliberately. They want to stop the bloodline. They want to prevent us from having children. They want to send a message and humiliate the menfolk, and they know that women are an easy target, and plus they think that we're lower than cattle in their sick, warped ideology. 3 women attacked, aged 19, 24 and 36, severely wounding 2 of them. My understanding, I believe, is that one of them was pregnant. Anyway, when pinned down to the floor, the guy shouted, "It is Allah who commanded me! It is Allah who commanded me!" And I'm reading here that the motive for the attack remains unknown. Oh. That's a tough one, isn't it? Can't figure out what might be going through that man's head. Don't know what sort of things he might have been reading online to, you know, motivate him to go out and try and slaughter young girls in the street. The French National Anti-Terrorist Prosecutor's Office said it was considering whether to open an investigation. Do you know what? In Berlin, they thought it was a good idea to bring a jihadist back from the Middle East to stand trial, to then basically serve nothing, really, of a sentence, to come out and sing Kumbaya with their version of Prevent, and guess what? He decided to go out and try and kill people. Let's speak now to Kasra Arabi, Director of the IRGC Research at United Against Nuclear Iran and Shia extremism expert. Let's start off with what's gone on in France, Kasra. I mean, these people cannot suddenly, really, be magically turned into anything that should remotely be in a Western country.
Well, you've got a situation where immigration is part of the problem, but it's also social cohesion and sectarianism. So you have a situation where the borders have been opened to Islamist extremists. We see that even here in the United Kingdom. We've just recently heard there was a report that the Islamic Centre of England, that's the official office of the Iranian regime's supreme leader in the United Kingdom. Why he has an office baffles me. This is someone who is ordering terror plots on our soil. But the Home Office has been giving privileges to that centre, to the Ayatollah's office in the UK, to bring imams over to Britain. Meanwhile, the organisation is under investigation. But if I go back to the point, it's also a matter of social cohesion, because a lot of these individuals who are being radicalised are second and third generations, so they are British born. What has happened is, as well as immigration, these hostile ideologies, these hostile states have been able to create what can only be described as a radicalization infrastructure, exploiting the government's lenient policies on establishing charities, mosques, cultural centres, and using this infrastructure to radicalize nationals here in the United Kingdom, nationals in France, and abroad. They are radicalizing individuals in broad daylight, nurturing anti-Semitism, and they've been caught red-handed on multiple occasions, yet the government is refusing to act. That's across Europe, by the way. It's not just in France. It's not just in Germany. It's here. It's happening here in the United Kingdom. It's happening on our soil.
But this is the problem. We've now entered the stage of what seems to me a fatal feedback loop, because the very people pushing for this idea that there's Islamophobia, that we need to have the Muslim society in the Home Office, or even in our agencies, the people who push this grievance narrative, which is an Islamist speciality. Let's poke the bear, make it react, and then pretend that we're the victims. The very people doing this are the people who are connected to these hostile regimes, and they're right at the heart of all of our civilian infrastructure. They've been seeded throughout public life, and they are the ones dictating how then we react to their existence.
I think there's a real illiteracy amongst our politicians across the civil service when it comes to Islamist extremism. There is a fear about talking about it. I have personally spearheaded investigations that have exposed Islamist extremist networks in London where they've been Zooming IRGC extremist commanders from Iran. And these commanders, these militant commanders, by the way, the same militant commanders that are killing the Iranian people on the streets and plotting terror abroad, are calling on British students to join their so-called apocalyptic army to, in their own words, end the lives of Jews everywhere in the world. Yet, when I presented this, and I've presented multiple instances, there is a reluctance to touch it for fear of being labelled Islamophobic. That needs, I mean, if that's the excuse, it is truly, truly appalling. This is a national security threat, by the way. The regime in Iran, as an example, effectively near declared war and made a declaration threat of war against us just a few days ago. And an official said, not only are they exploiting the small boats crisis, but actually they can attack Britain, they can attack our country without firing a single missile. That's because of that infrastructure. They have been nurturing, using the same tactics as ISIS and Al-Qaeda, nurturing Islamist radicalization on our territory, preparing individuals in Britain for attacks. Those attacks can range from, surveillance and intimidation, which is already going on, particularly against the British Jewish community and the British Iranian community here. Let's not forget they view those communities particularly as infidels, but also on the more harder end of the spectrum, where there's terrorist attacks and acts of violence. Again, what's the government done? It's been happening in broad daylight. It's been looking the other way. By the way, this is going to get even worse under Burnham. We see Burnham's pivot to the left. We see that for fear of losing segments of the Muslim vote, Burnham is pandering to the Islamists because he doesn't want to lose them to the Green Party. So the situation is extremely, extremely dangerous. And I believe we're heading towards a very, very dangerous path. It's only going to get worse.
This is my concern because, once upon a time, terrorist organisations were recruiting for soldiers to go join the caliphate over there. And that's when we spoke about it, made a big song and dance about it. Everyone knew about it. It was headlining the news day after day after day. It seems to me Islamists are now recruiting fighters here. And people in the intelligence agencies have suggested to me we have about 500 jihadi trainers. We now have these sort of, innocuous-looking Muslim summer camps. Come along, let's do some paintball. Learn how to fire a gun. Really? Is that just a summer camp? Where do you see this leading? When the IRGC threaten the UK, and they say we filled your land with terror cells. These people could be HMOs in your leafy village, probably not under any sort of surveillance. I mean, how bad can this get? There's a woman called Sarah Adams over in America who believes that terrorist entities could be plotting. She actually looks more Al-Qaeda, though. She does suggest these days that Al-Qaeda and the IEGC might actually have a relationship, ironically, which has never been known in the past. But her belief is that they are holding, waiting, counting down, because they can take the time to launch something akin to a coordinated October the 7th style attack in towns and cities across Europe. Do you have any intel on the sort of things that they might be planning?
Well, the IRGC has had a long-standing relationship with Al-Qaeda. In the early 1990s, they actually trained Al-Qaeda to carry out attacks against the US Embassy in Tanzania and Kenya. There's a long-standing relationship with the head of Al-Qaeda, who is actually residing in Iran right now under IRGC protection. So that relationship exists. Now, in terms of the style of attack, the IRGC is not only plotting direct attacks on British soil, so there are more than 20 terror plots have been foiled since 2022, it's not even that long, but also it's paying thugs, so thugs for hire. But the aspect that really has been overlooked is homegrown Islamist terrorism, homegrown radicalization, using methods like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. It is leaning into that even more, first of all, because it's created an infrastructure across Britain, charities, schools, mosques, that have been openly carrying out IRGC radicalization activities. But this form of homegrown terrorism also gives the IRGC enough plausible deniability to say it was a lone wolf actor, nothing to do with us. And that would likely deter a British retaliation, certainly under this Labour government. There's been no appetite. Even when the IRGC threatened war, the Labour government said that, oh, we are ready to defend ourselves. Defence is not the same as deterrence. The regime in Iran, this hostile Islamist regime that has held the Iranian people hostage for 47 years and is spreading terror across the world, including on our soil, needs to know that there's going to be consequences, including military consequences, if they seek to attack us. That is not happening. So the way we are moving forward, I mean, we are moving forward to a very dangerous path. It is only going to get worse. And unfortunately, it's down to the political leaders. You saw that Keir Starmer, weeks on end, enabled these hate marches. Let's be clear, they were hate marches. You had individuals wearing Hamas headbands, calling for jihad, calling for the murder of Jews. Actually, if you trace these protests, a lot of the sponsoring organizations have links to the Muslim Brotherhood, have links to the regime in Iran. We are heading for a path towards escalation. The government must act. National security should not be partisan, and the government needs to put national security before anything else. No more putting votes before national security, as Starmer did. As I said, Burnham seems more interested in doing that. He actually seems more interested in doing TikTok videos than taking national security seriously. But if we don't act now, we are really heading to a very dangerous path.
I think we're already on it, unfortunately. It's going to be pretty hard to reverse. But, Kasra, thank you so much. My goodness, I could talk to you all day. Let's link back up in the future and touch base on some of these big issues, because there's a lot more detail that would be really good to go into. Right. OK, let's take a short break now. And when we come back, we're going to be discussing, if that's not enough to keep you awake at night, then good luck. We're probably going to be having blackouts this winter. Hey, it's all looking good for Britain. That's coming up after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, if things couldn't get worse, things can always get worse in this country. It's not like 1997, the Blair years, where things can only get better. It's kind of the flip reverse, isn't it? Well, here's the latest thing. Apparently, Europe faces an energy crisis because they are unable to stockpile gas to get them through winter. The continent's storage tanks are barely 50% full, which is a historical low for this time of year. All of this, of course, being increasingly exacerbated by the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz. But Britain, which no longer stores significant amounts of gas, because why would we need to, will probably have to pay above the odds on the wholesale market this winter, having yet another massive effect on energy bills. Will the lights stay on? Let's speak now to Andy Mayer, energy analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs. How bad is it? Because we heard over the course of the weekend whistleblowers from NESO, aka the energy grid, saying that we almost plunged into a crisis on June the 23rd because everyone wanted to watch the World Cup. And then at the same time, there's a load of sunshine and it seemed to mess about with the grid system, the base load or whatever. Now we're facing another winter. We can, without doubt, expect sky-high bills. We have them already. But are we going to have to stockpile candles?
So quite a lot to unpack there, but I'll try and be brief. So two slightly different but related things. The crisis on June the 23rd was about electricity. And although gas is the thing that underpins the electricity system, when the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining, you can get resources from other things like interconnectors. The gas storage crisis is much more about what would happen in midwinter if we either lost access to our usual supplies, which are Norway, our own resources in the North Sea, and LNG imports, or more likely, the price went shooting up and became unaffordable, which is what most people think is going to happen this winter unless something dramatic happens in the Gulf. And even then, they're going to be a bit more expensive. But just to go to your first point, I mean, we don't have gas storage in this country because we had the North Sea. That was our energy security solution for gas. So when the times were hard, we were able to turn the taps on, get more gas in. But this government and the previous one have been hostile to North Sea development, and they still haven't taken decisions on fields that are ready to go. So until that changes, we can't go back to that. So quite reasonably, people are saying there may need to be other solutions like they have in Europe who don't have access to the North Sea. For example, building storage in Rough, which is the proposal on the table from Centrica.
I mean, how long will it take us to build that storage? Because if there's one thing I can see about Britain for the past 3 decades is it takes, well, 3 decades to try and build anything and then it never comes to fruition. I mean, are we going to be prepped and ready come the bleak midwinter? If it's a very cold winter, people are suggesting it's probably likely to be as a result of El Nino. I mean, what on earth are we going to do? Because the same government want to do things like ban coal, you know, sticking coal in your fireplace or log burners. I mean, what are we supposed to do? Just shiver?
So Rough can't be built quickly. So 3 to 5 years is the current estimate. And that assumes everything goes right. And as you rightly say, trying to build any infrastructure in the UK is hard. And reasonably, Centrica want the same kind of guarantees from government to build this thing as the renewables industry get when they're building offshore wind farms. So total protection from future governments changing their mind. So that's one barrier. If environmental protesters use lawfare to try and block every single stage of the development, you're looking more like 7 to 10 years, at which point there's no point doing it. So what you're left with instead is what the third world rely on, which is floating storage and regasification units, which are like a big fast tap you stick offshore. And Germany actually used that in 2022 at the start of the Ukraine crisis. And that enables you to get some gas into your system, but you're then reliant on getting the tankers. And there's an awful lot of global competition for those at the moment, in part caused by the shortage from the Gulf of Hormuz crisis.
I can imagine it also is fairly vulnerable infrastructure as well if Russia wanted to perform any sort of hostile deeds. Andy, thank you ever so much. Andy Mayer there, who's the energy analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Happy days, guys. So many good things to talk about, right? Well, at least it's communal catharsis. That sort of free therapy continues just after this break, so don't go anywhere. I'll see you on the other side.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, that's happy music, isn't it? That's what we need to sort of settle ourselves into this Tuesday as we navigate yet more dystopian headlines in clown country, the mayoralty of Britain. How is it that the Labour Party are polling... no offence, OK, to the great compatriots of this country, but so many of you are just stupid. You know, it's like feeding candy to a baby or something. You're just idiots. The Andy for us and an emoji is all you need to, I don't know, distract you from the apocalyptic situation our country is actually in. Oh, there you go. We are going to be talking about polling and questioning whether the Burnham bounce is going to be concretised, whether he should have sensibly called an early general election, something he appears to have ruled out. But I can't imagine the honeymoon period is going to be particularly protracted. But you never know. But on that note, why is the honeymoon period not going to be particularly protracted? Well, because Burnhamomics seems to be crashing Burnhamomics, doesn't it? It seems to be burn through as much money that's in the Treasury as fast as possible with no sensible programme of how to top it up. It means, without a doubt, if he's going to bring in adult social care, renationalising utilities, devolution, all those extra pen pushers and apparatchiks and all the pensions and all the rest of it that he'd like to see happen, if he wants to maintain the level of welfare, he says he wants to cut it, well, the backbenchers are not a fan of that, are they? If he's going to find the extra £10 billion for defence, oh, let's not forget all the new house building. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And if he's going to do any of it, even just one of these things, well, he's going to have to get money from somewhere. And it doesn't grow on trees, whatever socialists might think. It comes out of our pay packets, directly or indirectly, one way or another. And I think when the rubber hits tarmac, I think when people either realise that they are being fleeced for more of their hard-earned cash to pay for wasteful, leftist, ideologically naive and frankly perilous projects, or the opposite is we go over the edge of the cliff. The precipice is no longer a precipice. It's hell in a handcart. It's a hurtling, careering speed, and the IMF going, you're too big to bail out. Well, he might have wished he'd called that general election in a little more of a timely fashion. Let's speak now to William Yarwood, Campaigns Director at Taxpayers Alliance. I mean, let's start off with this headline, which we knew anyway. Number of UK millionaires shrinks to the lowest in nearly 2 decades. I remember when I heard about the exodus of millionaires leaving London. It was about 11,500 last year and 12,500 the year before. And people on the left going, oh, go on then, we don't need you anyway. Off you go. And it's like, who do you think you're taxing? Where do you think the money's coming from to put migrants up in hotels?
Yeah, well, good morning, Alex. Great to be on the show. And yeah, this is a great piece of research from our friends at the Adam Smith Institute, who've actually been running this millionaire tracker for quite some time now. And what they've shown actually that there are less millionaires. There are less millionaires in the UK now, and than there has been since 2008, since the financial crash, for crying out loud. And you're right, you know, when it comes to thinking about the tax burden on ordinary people, we're set for a record high tax burden next year. You're going to be thinking about, well, how is Andy Burnham going to be, you know, funding all these promises he has? And surely he should be wanting to encourage as many millionaires, as many wealthy people to move to the country, to create businesses, to create jobs, to engender growth, in order so that he can enjoy some of that tax revenue in order to spend it on his priorities. But this is a symptom, I think, of a longer term problem in Great Britain, which is basically we don't encourage wealth, we don't encourage business. In many ways, actually, Alex, I think we're quite sceptical towards it. We think people who have earned a decent whack in their life, who've set something up, who've been successful, are in some way cheating the system. And therefore, you know, what needs to be done is horrible wealth taxes need to be imposed on them, despite the fact, of course, they've never worked in the first place. So yeah, I'm resolutely pro-millionaire. I'm resolutely pro these people being in the country, and I think this government should be encouraging as many of these people to move here and not encouraging them to move abroad.
When you look at some of the things that Burnhamism seems to be outlining as the priorities, the aforementioned priorities, these are big ticket items. These aren't things that come with a little price tag. This isn't just a shiny little extra bauble on the oh Christmas tree socialist flag, whatever it's called. This is big stuff. I mean, just renationalising Thames Water, which is in a pickle, to put it mildly, is something like 22 billion quid. To renationalise a lot of them, it's about 250 billion every single year, which is almost the same as the NHS budget. You add up the things we desperately need to do. Then you look at the deficit and the debt to GDP ratio. And I just wonder, at what point are we going to get the call from Christine Lagarde saying, it's over, you're done, and there's nothing we can do for you?
Yeah, well, the fact that we've got a chancellor called Healey again. I mean, the last time we had a chancellor called Healey, they did have to go to the IMF and get a bailout. But the interesting thing about Dennis Healey, when he was chancellor, Alex, is he stood in front of the Labour Party conference, I believe, in the late 1970s, and basically said to the Labour Party base, like, look, we're going to have to do public spending cuts, we're going to have to get inflation under control, and we need to go to the IMF for a bailout. Otherwise, we're going to go bankrupt and everything's going to go down the sink. Could you imagine Andy Burnham or John Healey doing that to the current Labour Party or the current Labour Party parliamentarians, or even just the voter base that they have in the country, which mostly comprises of people on welfare and public sector workers? Could you imagine them trying to explain fiscal prudence and spending cuts to these people? And yet, you're right regarding all of Burnham's spending promises, and I think we talked about it in detail last time I was on your show, whether it's nationalising utilities, which is going to cost hundreds of billions of pounds, whether it's building more social homes, which is going to cost upwards of £40 billion. And then, of course, this new social care levy, which he wants to impose, which, of course, is just inheritance tax and all another name. And he's refused to say whether this is a replacement for inheritance tax or is simply going to be on top of pre-existing inheritance tax laws. And the problem with Burnham, with all of this, Alex, with all of this, is while he's saying he wants this, he wants that, he hasn't really given any detail about, one, how it's going to be funded, or how these systems are going to be reformed and going to go forward into the future. And that's because I think Andy Burnham, to some extent, is kind of just avoiding the media entirely. He's avoiding scrutiny. He's off on his summer recess. He's, going on podcasts rather than talking to members of the press. And that leaves us all speculating and leaves us all worrying about what we could see in the autumn budget, which could possibly be more public spending, more tax rises, neither of which the country needs at this current moment.
And you say that, can you imagine Andy Burnham or John Healey having to explain this to their backbenchers, to their mates in the unions, and having to suggest that the IMF might need a friendly knock at the door, although they have already warned us that the answer is no, we can't afford it. Well, the thing is, I don't think it's necessarily going to be a case of can you imagine? Is it going to be a case of, well, this is actually in train? Because I don't know how he's getting away with this. I don't understand how we've essentially had a silent communist coup, a man coming out with some pretty wild socialist spending plans. He's like, supermarket sweep when it comes to leftist policies with big price tags, filling up his shopping cart with everything going. And all of a sudden we've got the summer to sit there and wait and see what might happen if he does pop out the other side and start saying, yes, I want to do all these big ticket items. Are we going to see the markets have a meltdown?
He possibly could do, Alex, especially if he goes for borrowing. I mean, I know he said he wants to stay within the fiscal rules, but even then, he said there's room for manoeuvre, which always indicates that he can change the rules again in order to do more borrowing. One interesting thing, actually, that people don't talk about all that often is actually the last Labour government with Rachel Reeves as Chancellor. They actually changed the way they measured debt, which meant that basically they could essentially borrow more money for so-called public investment in public services. Now, I ask anybody listening or watching your show, Alex, whether they feel that the more borrowing we've had over the last 2 years when Rachel Reeves was Chancellor and Keir Starmer was Prime Minister, if they feel that any of their public services have got better because of it. I highly doubt it. So I think if Burnham does go ahead with more borrowing, obviously the bond markets are going to have quite a shock. And indeed, let's not forget what Andy Burnham was saying just a few months ago, that we are in hock to the bond markets. We should ignore the bond markets. They're controlling too much of politics. And on one level, I agree with him. We are too much in hock to the bond markets. But you know why we are? Is because because we have a national debt of 2.8 trillion, debt interest on that debt reaching over 110 billion, and a massive budget deficit. So if he doesn't want to be in hock to the bond market, maybe he should get public spending under control. Maybe he should try and reduce the national debt. But, you know, I don't think he's particularly interested in any of these things because, like you said, he just wants to throw out all these policies forward, which are in many ways, yes, very socialistic, or as he would call it, Manchesterism, which essentially is just tax and spend by any other name. And in reality, Burnham is going to appear in autumn along with John Healey, and they're going to announce a new set of tax rises, whether it's on inheritance tax, on capital gains, and a variety of other things. And I'm not thinking that the tax burden is going to go down. I don't think the debt's going to go down. And yeah, I don't think the markets are going to have a very good response to it at all.
I think you're right, because one thing that is quite clear is a couple of years ago, the IMF, before Sir Keir Starmer came into power, my understanding is the IMF turned around and said, listen, son, you've got to sort out this bloated welfare bill. It is utterly unsustainable. For the first time ever, what we pay out in welfare now exceeds what we actually garner through taxation of those people who are working and are therefore net contributors. And what we now know is this £333 billion welfare bill, well, it isn't going to come down because Labour MPs have already threatened to rebel if Andy Burnham makes what they're considering punitive cuts to welfare. He's sort of spoken loosely about NEETs and wanting to get these people off benefits, off PIP, into the workplace. Oh, well, let's have various apprenticeship schemes. Let's make sure that everybody can go into a physical job, except there's nothing about open-door immigration, which is often why, you know, those particular, the lowest rung of the ladder jobs are not available to school leavers. And I just can't see in any way, shape or form how he is going to traverse the quagmire. He's going to face exactly the same stagnancy from the immovable hard left on the back benches. He's going to have to fight the same battles. And yes, he's got longer eyelashes to flutter, but I just can't see him winning this war.
No, I can't either, Alex. I think we're going to see when Parliament comes back. I think we're going to see quite a farce. I mean, you remember the farce that was the welfare reform bill when that was going on in Parliament, and the way that Labour MPs were describing the reforms as Victorian and Dickensian, despite the fact that the reforms were very, very modest and very, very mild. I mean, they were only going to reduce the overall welfare bill by about £5 billion over the course of this Parliament, presuming it runs to 2029. I mean, £5 billion is nothing considering the fact that it's now going to reach over 400 billion, over 400 billion pounds by the end of this decade. That's taking into account things like pensions, that's taking into account things like disability benefits. And also, when it comes to disability benefits, the biggest growth there is young people claiming for things like anxiety, depression, and other mild mental health illnesses. And yet, Andy Burnham thinks that this can be solved by, you know, encouraging apprenticeships and technical skills. And while I may be in favour of that, in reality, there needs to be some eligibility and some means testing put on these people so that these people actually aren't able to claim for these kind of mental health benefits. But like you said earlier, Andy Burnham's not going to do it because his Labour backbenchers rebelled over a modest reform. Imagine what they'd rebel over and how they would be acting if Andy Burnham went ahead with something like that. So yeah, I think it's same old, same old. We're going to see the same old problems that we had under Starmer and Reeves. Nothing's going to really change. And I wouldn't be surprised by the end of this decade or even sooner if the IMF came in knocking to the door. And the last point I'll say, Alex, to scare you and your viewers even more, the former chief economist of the IMF said that Britain has a 50-50 chance of dealing with a sovereign debt crisis by the end of this decade. That is genuinely serious, especially when our borrowing costs are higher than Greece's, and we all know how that turned out.
Oh, hurrah! Time to start digging holes in the garden and burying some cash money in there. William Yarwood, Campaigns Director of Taxpayers Alliance, thank you for your candour. We're going to be taking a short break now, but if you want to get in touch with the programme, the number is 0344 499 1000. It's your normal network rate, so you can call at any time, register your interest, and we'll give you a call back. You can use that number as well to send a WhatsApp message or indeed leave a voice note on WhatsApp. 87222 is the number if you want to send a text message. If you're going to do that, write the word talk before your text. I'm back after this.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Let's do some messages, actually. I haven't really dug into the depths of your brilliance yet. Someone's just said, have you noticed that all the hate comes from the Be Kind, refugees are welcome, trans, LGBT, WXYZAW brigade? Yes, it's called the inversion of the truth, moral inversion, where black is white and good is bad, and the fascists are the freedom fighters and men are women. And this has been going on now. It's really discombobulating. But it's been going on in so many areas now. Like I said, they mess with language, they mess with your minds, they gaslight you, they lie to your face, and they create this sort of element of confusion. And they are the oppressors. Like I said, we are essentially the persecuted on the right wing. They are the fascists. And it's been going on for far too long. And see how audacious they're getting now. They've gotten away with it for decades. They will stop at nothing. Of that, I am certain. If anyone from Reform had done what sicko Polanski did, they'd have been in a cell by now. They would, in fact, if anyone from Reform, even someone that no one's even heard of, it would be the only thing on those TV screens up there in my studio. It'd be the only thing being spoken about. I remember when some sort of random village councillor who had defected from the Conservative Party over to UKIP and had just written a letter to local newspapers, and he'd been writing sort of slightly madcap letters to local newspapers for decades. Then all of a sudden he defects to UKIP, doesn't even tell UKIP, he just goes, I'm with UKIP now. Because why would you? It's just a little parish councillor in, like, you know, Little Piddington or something. And then he writes to the newspapers about how the mass floods of 2000 and whatever it was might have been retribution for the Same-Sex Marriage Act. And it's all that we heard about. A man that no one knew, no one even knew he'd defected, just a sort of, you know, Baptist. He's more than actually welcome to hold those views. They're fairly traditional and biblical. And it was the front page of every newspaper, right? And now you have a Green Party activist suggesting that if they were to get into power, that Nigel Farage would be executed a la the Great Purge of the elites during the French Revolution. You know, suggesting that political opposition will be sent to their deaths under a future Green Party government. And actually, and I was saying this earlier, it happens slowly, and then all of a sudden, all at once. And mark my words, these freakazoids, if they ever did get into power, they would. I think they actually would. I don't think it's a joke. I think that they sincerely would like to do it because, you know, there was an incredible report done at a university in America about the psychology behind DEI, all of this stuff. And they said it's equivalent to brainwashing people into becoming authoritarians. So when you have the radical left who have gobbled up every last bit of critical race theory, every last bit of decolonization, every last bit of anti-racism, anti-fascism, all this stuff, they've essentially been groomed and turned into, that's right, little fascists themselves. Don't take my word for it. That is a psychological report that looks into these things. So I don't think it's funny. Do I think it needs reporting to the police? Well, what it does need is reporting to the parliamentary authorities. What it does need is serious coverage in the legacy media, who, if the boot was on the other foot and this was anything to do with a right-wing party, would be having a field day about it. What it does need is a serious national conversation, because I'm not going to forget that my former colleague is no longer with us, OK? I can't forget it, because my life and the lives of my friends have irreversibly changed as a result of that. So, do you know what? They might run around, he might live on his longboat, old Zach Polanski, his barge with his little sort of, you know, woke mates, and go to Heaven nightclub and stand in Trafalgar Square with people in leather chaps giving it all this, aren't I modern, aren't I wonderful? There are other people now who are frankly afraid to leave their doors unlocked in a friendly local village. So it isn't funny. I'm not sure about reporting to the police, but my goodness, something somewhere needs to be done. It needs to be done, because I don't know, we are creeping into a form of tyranny that, if it is left unchecked, the outcomes are ghoulish. History has taught us those lessons, and they are repeating themselves at an alarming rate. The anti-Semitism, the censorship, the cancellation, it's equivalent to the burning of books, the two-tier system of justice. This is how it begins. You don't want to see how it ends. Although, is it gonna? Because apparently the burn and bounce people love Emoji Andy, don't they? They love the new mayor of Great Britain. Oh, he's just nice. He wears a black T-shirt. He looks like a quite attractive school PE teacher. I don't know. Some people are just so easily cajoled by the feels. Let's speak to the brilliant Conservative peer and expert pollster, Lord Robert Hayward, to give us a little bit of a sanguine overview of where polling is at, whether Burnham should call an early election, because let's face it, is that honeymoon period going to last very long? What is your take on this very first poll that has put Labour ahead of Reform?
Good morning. There's actually been a second poll that has put Labour ahead. You raised a whole series of questions. Let's deal with them in step. One is there a Burnham bounce? Yes. But why is there a Burnham bounce? Is it because they like him but don't know anything more about him? Possibly. But also, there'll be a very strong factor in that Burnham bounce, in inverted commas, that shows that, thank goodness, it's not Keir Starmer any longer. The most unpopular Prime Minister post an election that we've ever had. And Labour have changed leaders. So there was always going to be a Burnham bounce. It's a question as to what has caused it. And it's probably a combination of those factors, along with what we have witnessed in relation to reform has been a steady decline over the last few months. And that is associated with a marked drop in Nigel Farage's favourability amongst the public.
Can we therefore sort of draw on a causal connection between all the newspaper reports into funding, financial irregularities, what Reform might consider themselves to be lawfare? Other people in the public might go, well, actually, it's due scrutiny and we're concerned about this. Do you think that that is what is behind this dip in Reform's favourability?
It's been going on since before these issues arose. But as a political party, Reform is tied more strongly to its leader, Nigel Farage, than any other of the major political parties, whether it be Kemi's rating is favourable, but it's only slightly pulling up the Conservatives. Labour's rating, Starmer, appalling. It pulled down Labour, but not to the same extent as Keir Starmer's unpopularity. So therefore, it's a combination of factors, but there is no question that Nigel Farage's problems, because Reform are so tightly identified with Nigel Farage, is pulling the party down.
Do you think that a positive result in Clacton for Nigel Farage can start to change the course of that trajectory?
No, I think that's a separate issue. As you know, all the parties, other major parties, have not participated. There'll be lots of different interpretations of the result in the by-election, and I think it will pass over. There is, as you just identified, much broader issues. Clacton is a constituency in itself, has very specific demographic aspects which are strongly pro-reform. So no, not a good victory for Farage immediately having an impact on a national basis. It may have a little ripple effect, but nothing more than that.
Andy Burnham has seemingly said he's not going to call an early general election. He said that to Laura Kuenssberg. But do you think he's going to look at this Burnham bounce, look at the seat projections under first past the post and realise that actually, if he wants to secure a mandate, have a 5-year term instead of a 3-year term, in order to carry out some of these pretty ambitious plans he seems to be leaking out to the press? Do you think that his strategists might say in a couple of weeks' time, look, we got to do it?
I think there is a rising possibility that he might do it, but two major issues. One is Labour have such an enormous lead in the House of Commons that just calling an election, even on some good figures, would mean that 50, 100 of their members of Parliament might well lose. And those people are not going to be keen on going on to a general election. Secondly, Labour have used this recess so far and the start of Andy Burnham's prime ministerships very effectively in the way that Nigel Farage used last August very effectively. But he hasn't put himself under scrutiny of either politicians or the media. He's not faced public questioning in with large audiences. And the risk of calling an election would be that you are suddenly put under scrutiny and that bounce dissipates rapidly and you don't finish up with the result that you might think you're going to get looking at a few polls in early August. My advice under those circumstances would be, no, don't have a general election. I don't think there will be, but you're right, the pressure for it is rising somewhat.
Very quickly, I just want to ask you another thing. It seems to me that some of the issues or ideas or policy projections that are being tested in the public domain at the moment are changes to the nature of the plebiscite. We saw this happening in Wales, where they've moved to partial system of PR, votes to 16-year-olds in Scotland. Something that has been sort of spilled out is the idea of moving to compulsory voting. Would that favour the left wing, or might they have a bit of a nasty surprise? Because if they force compulsory voting, a lot of those people who rarely turn out to vote but did so in the 2016 Brexit referendum might be minded to back the right-wing parties.
I think it's a very, very risky process. The Labour Party changed the electoral system in Scotland so that the SNP could never get into power. Look what happened. The Labour Party in Wales changed the electoral system thinking it would be to their advantage. Look what happened. Disastrous results for Labour in May. I think anybody within the Labour Party who's got any sense will say, don't start playing around with the system, because look what's happened to us in both Scotland and Wales.
Well, there you go. Be poetic justice, some might say, if they did decide to mess with the franchise without any recourse to us, the voters. I always love catching up with you, Lord Hayward. Thank you ever so much for giving up part of your morning to join us today. Right, if you want to chat with me, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We're going to be taking calls at the end of this hour, around 11:45, so register your interest now. We'll give you a call back. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp. 8722 is the number to send a text like the word talk before you send your message. When we come back, we're going to be talking about perhaps one of the biggest scalps, let's say, that Restore Britain may have publicly got so far, which is that of former actor-comedian John Cleese, who says he trusts Rupert Lowe more than any other party leader. They seem to have been having a dip lately. They seem to have sort of fallen out of circulation somewhat. They're not trending as well as they used to on social media. I thought maybe the peak was over. Perhaps Cleese might turn things around. We're going to be discussing that with Orla Minahane, spokeswoman for Restore Britain, just after this.
So the full list of candidates for the Clacton by-election: Joseph 77, the Independent; Adam Akatip, the Forward Party; Count Binface, the Count Binface Party; Nick the Incredible Flying Brick, the Official Monster Raving Loony Party; Tony Kane's an independent. Woke Trump Kazi is an independent. William Stewart James Clouston is the Social Democratic Party candidate. Rhys Cowan, an independent. Glenn Charles Cummings, an independent. Martin Davis, the Freedom Alliance Real People Real Alternative. Andy Earlam's an independent. Nigel Farage, the Reform UK Party. Atiye Fards, an independent. Lawrence Fox for the Reclaim Party. Tony Francis is an independent. Robin Green, an independent. Abby Hookway, an independent. Howling Lord Hope, the Official Monster Raving Loony Party. Stephen Richard Ingram is an independent, as is Amy Morris. Derek Norbert Morris is an independent. Michael Noel O'Keefe, an independent. Martin O'Brien, an independent. Nick Pellis, an independent. And Ketanar Kumar PPIA is the UK Voice Safer and Stronger UK Party. Daniel Pocock's an independent. James Ransley, the Consensus Party candidate. Jerry Smith is an independent. Kai Stevens for the British Democrats. John Stevens for rejoin the EU. Baron von Thunderclap for the official Monster Raving Loony Party. Pamela Walford is an independent. Marcus White, Everyone is God Party. And Mark Wilkinson for the Independents.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back. Well, I haven't been speaking about them for a while, which is a welcome break for a change, because normally when the words Restore Britain come out of my mouth, I face the onslaught of a load of vile, misogynic pigs online trolling me and making up rubbish about me. But here we go. Let's venture back into that battlefield, shall we? Because here we go on my news list. It turns out that John Cleese, the comedian, an actor, much loved, some might say a national treasure, has turned around and said he trusts Rupert Lowe more than any other party leader. Now, what is so staggering about this is for a long time, John Cleese was actually a supporter of the Liberal Democrats. They actually offered him, I believe, a life peerage, which he turned down. That is quite a U-turn when it comes to political sentiments. But is this going to potentially revive the fortunes of Restore Britain, who had a fairly decent showing in the Makerfield by-election, but have gone rather quiet since then? Let's speak now to Orla Minahane, who's spokeswoman for the party. Good morning to you, Orla. I trust you're doing well, my darling.
How are you? You look lovely in yellow. Lovely in yellow, Alex.
Well, do you know, it's nice to be all sunny and spring-like, isn't it? When we're facing, you know, dystopian times, it's always good to try and add a little bit of light into the shadow. That's what I think. I mean, look, this is a very welcome boost for you, I'd imagine.
So, yeah, I mean, look, John Cleese is, as you say, he's a national treasure, right? And I agree with you, a very, very strange move somewhat to the right. But I do think that, you know, before we were in this tragic situation we find ourselves in with out-of-control immigration, et cetera, and you know, a terrible state of unsafety, if that's such a word, on our streets, our women and children being put at risk, etc. I think most of us were pretty liberal back in the day, or certainly more centre. And what's happening is people like John Cleese, as an older man, and I would imagine with a family and children and grandchildren, is seeing that actually the Lib Dems have gone very much to the left and the country is in dire straits. So that's obviously why he's supporting us. Now, I know that Rupert isn't your most favourite man in the world, Alex, but people like Rupert. They like him, they trust him, they see him as a strong potential leader. And, you know, he's an older gentleman as well. So I guess John Cleese feels that he is somebody that represents him and his new way of thinking. And I know you don't feel the same, but many people do, Alex.
But this is the thing, OK, so he says he trusts him. But if you look at the sort of right-wing podosphere where everybody interviews everyone else in the ecosystem, a woman called Catherine Blakelock, who once upon a time set up the name of the Brexit Party, registered it as a political party and had a fallout with Nigel Farage when some of her spicier views around the time of fighting the snap election were uncovered, who then came over to Restore Britain, certainly gave me a lot of stick, has turned around and been saying, well, the thing I've been saying for a long time, which is your man Rupert Lowe has an incredibly strange relationship with the Conservative Party. She seems to be now endorsing the things that I've found out. Does that not worry you?
No, not at all. Look, I personally think I like Catherine. I think she's very experienced. She's a very opinionated woman, and that's her prerogative. There's many opinionated women around, as we know. However, I know that she's had, I don't know what's happened, but she's obviously had a fallout with somebody or several people at Restore, and that's her prerogative as well. You know, ultimately, we live in a democratic society with free speech, and people can come and go and align themselves with political parties if they so wish. Catherine has, and this is not, and I would say this to her, so no disrespect to Catherine, but she has a tendency to fall out with people, you know, and again, as an opinionated person, we tend to, and I'm sure you're the same, Alex, fall out with people. You know, that's the name of the game. We're living in a very, a world of, you know, in ambiguity, if you like. Nobody really knows what's going to happen in the future. We've got Andy Burnham running around pretending he's Fatboy Slim. We've got, you know, everything's in disarray, and people feel that, you know, they align themselves to something, they don't agree with it, and then they try and find someone else to align themselves with. It's just we're living in a very separatist scenario, if you like. I don't even know what to call it. I find it challenging, as I'm sure you do.
It is challenging indeed. Now, were it to emerge that there is a behind-the-scenes relationship between Restore Britain and the Conservative Party that you have not been briefed on, that you've not been privy to, and that, in fact, the job of Restore Britain is simply to stop Farage, certainly it looked that way, not competing in Aberdeen, but doing so in Makerfield and targeting only reform areas, and also joining the boycott of Clacton. And, well, there's various other things that are out there and various other things as yet that are not. But were it now to concretely emerge that there has been a stitch-up and the role of Restore Britain is to prevent reform getting a majority, would you stick with Restore Britain?
I don't think that's the case, and I don't know is the answer, so I'm not going to comment. I have no idea what goes on. You know, I speak to Rupert. I certainly don't speak to him every day about his political alliances, but I have to say that we have got 400 branches across the UK. We've got 150,000 members. We are building, and when you said earlier about the fact we've gone a bit silent because we're building our infrastructure, I cannot see that there is any potential to join the Tories. I can't see that that's on the cards. I certainly.
But were it to emerge that there is this stitch-up and the role of Restore is to stop reform? I mean, it's ironic, isn't it, that they're so similarly named as well? But were it to emerge, what would be your reaction?
I have no idea. I can't answer that question until I was posed with that decision. All I care about, as you know, Alex, before I joined Restore, before I joined Reform, I was an advocate for women and girls' safety. That is what I remain, and that is my main focus. And for me, a party that is behind the women and children's safety in this country, around rape gangs, around migrant sexual assault, we have a rape epidemic. That's the thing that drives me, and that is my main direction, no matter who I was.
So can I level something to you, Orla? Because as you know, you and I mean, I fight on this issue a lot as well, and that's why you and I have such a great relationship, because we are so concerned about the huge social changes in this country and wanting to stand up for our daughters, our nieces, our sisters, each other, because without a doubt 2026 is the worst time to be a woman in Britain for a very 100%. Very long time. Whenever I have spoken about the party that you're a member of, I'll be honest with you, the backlash, the hate, the bullying, the threats, the lies, the misinformation, the nastiness, the misogyny that comes out of the supporters of Restore Britain is worse than anything I've ever seen on the left. In fact, your own party leader has enjoyed going on various right-wing podcasts and insinuating I'm having illicit affairs. I mean, that's not exactly that's hardly standing up for women and girls, is it?
No, absolutely. Now,
do I deserve that? What's going on here? Why does there seem to be a sort of unfettered manosphere online marching under the flag of Restore Britain? And why on earth does Rupert Lowe think it's OK to insinuate that I'm having affairs, which I'm not? Can I just say I shouldn't have to go on the airwaves and say that? It's disgusting. That is misogynistic. It is sexist. It is silencing women by pulling out the old-fashioned trope, isn't it? Oh, she's mad. Oh, she must be sleeping with someone. That's why she's saying and doing those things. That insinuation came from your party leader. What do you have to say about that?
I don't know. I can't answer for Rupert, Alex. You know that,
You
right?
can answer for yourself. What do you
for
feel about that?
Okay, so myself, I have, and I swear as God is my witness, I have never experienced misogyny or anything disrespectful within the party towards myself. I can only judge things by how I find them. However, and I'm going to turn this back now, the abuse that I've had from Reform when I left was absolutely despicable from women, mainly women at Reform.
So what do you think about your party leader making insinuations that people are mentally unwell or having an affairs when they're women?
I understand that, but with all due respect as well, Rupert was absolutely targeted for having dementia.
He said this. He's your party leader. Those were his comments about a woman. It does happen to be me, and I'm asking you, sister to sister, right now, solidarity for standing up for women who have a tough enough job as it is in the 21st century, without being vilified with these old misogynistic, old-fashioned tropes to try and silence us that, quite frankly, are bullying and sexist. They came out of his mouth. I have seen them on multiple occasions come out of his mouth.
Yeah, I can't comment, Alex. I don't know.
No, but you should do, shouldn't you? Because if
I will.
Is it okay that he said that?
No, of course not. It's not okay that any man is disrespectful to a woman, ever. I've never seen the comment, so I can't comment. But I'm taking your word for it, and all I can say to you is that no woman should take abuse of any kind from any man, no matter who they are and where they are. That's all I can say. And I certainly won't part with it. And if you have felt that or it's been directed at you, all I can do is apologise.
Yeah, it's angered me, and frankly, it has hurt me quite a lot.
And I can see that. I can see that.
It has. It's a horrible thing when you're just trying to do your job and people are, spreading vile slander about you that's entirely false.
Alex, you look, and as you referred to in your last interview, look at Anne. Look at what happened to Anne, right? We both knew her. Horrendous. Why did that happen? Why does anything happen in this day and age to anybody, women or men? Unfortunately, you stick your head above the parapet, you give your opinion, you get slated. That's the world we live in. It's not fair, it's not right, but that is what we're trying to deal with. And all I can say to you, and to any other woman that says and stands up for her rights and the rights of her family and her children and herself, is stay strong, ignore the noise and keep going. That's all we can do. That's all we can do.
Ola, I appreciate you so much. Thank you, my darling. And I always respect you for your battle for women. I really, really do, even if I might have slightly divergent views about a certain man to you. I'm not a Me Too movement person. I'm not, oh my God, I've been through this for ages. Do you know what I mean? As a Brexit Party MEP and in the public eye now, as a woman, your love life... Even the start of this show, right? Why is it your love life is so fascinating to everybody? Why do they always sort of come up with those tropes? It's not nice. But hey, I got a thick skin. C'est la vie, as I'm minded to think. But still, I find it quite hypocritical to say I'm here championing women and girls, right? Using that to try and get ahead. And then hardly doing that in some of the other proselytizations that's come out of one's mouth. Let's do calls after this, shall we? I'm sure you want to throw in your two-bit on all the various topics we've been talking about. And here's one as well. I always get the impression that between Restore and Reform, because if you were to put their policy pledges side by side, you couldn't put a fag paper between them, quite frankly. You couldn't. The wedge issue seems to be Islam. That seems to be the area that there is a distinction being drawn. And it's also seemingly the thing that has attracted John Cleese to that particular party as well. 03444 991 is the number to dial if you want to have a chit-chat with me. I would love to talk to you. You can also send me a WhatsApp on that number. 87222 is the number to send a text message. Write the word talk before you text. We're taking a short break, and then after that, we're opening up the floors to the wonderful audience of talk. So stay tuned and give us a call. Back after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, hey, it's message and call time. It's my favourite segment of the show because I don't have to do all the talking. You help bear that heavy load. Right, here you go. Someone sent a message saying, if you'd like to try a small social experiment, oh, go on then. Go into any room with more than 8 people and say in a loud but normal speaking voice, I think President Trump is one of the greatest presidents there's ever been. Then notice what happens. That single remark has cost me friendships and driven a wedge between me and some relatives. Yeah, you know, sometimes I sort of fancy walking about the world in a MAGA hat in my Lib Dem area just to see what would happen. But then I kind of realise that I might be inviting more trouble than it's worth. Alex, when do I expect Animal Farm in 1984 to be classed as prescribed books and banned and even burned? Oh, I think that's probably already happening in university departments around the country, if I'm honest. Shortage of prison places, water shortage, power cuts. It's not complicated. Build more prisons, more reservoirs and more power stations, says John in Cheshire. Well, you need the money to do it, and I'm afraid we've hit peak Laffer curve. Now, the peak Laffer curve is when you tax people so much that you actually make less money in the Treasury because everyone nicks off and finds ways to avoid or evade taxation. And so what ends up happening is your returns in the Exchequer are far, far less than if you actually cut taxes. And I'm afraid we've hit peak Laffer. Probably haven't hit peak illegal migration, though. And so we ain't got the money. It's that simple. Hi, Alex. Labour's crime plan. Prisons full? Release the murderers and rapists early and hope daytime TV reformed them. Nothing says tough on crime like writing to rape victims that their attacker gets a mid-sentence gap year because we ran out of cells, says Nikki in Bristol. It's disgusting, isn't it? There are people whose lives are forever changed due to the crimes that these people have only served 2 years inside a cell to pay. Come on. Now, Alex, your civilization isn't 2,000 years old. It's a couple of 100 years old, at most originating with the Industrial Revolution. The way we live now has nothing in common with how life was in Roman times. I think that's a bit of a stretch, and plus 2,000 years is sort of, you know, I'm sort of alluding more to 1066 and all that. My lot came over in the Norman conquest. That's the beginning of our sort of hybrid English language. And you say that my civilization's got nothing in common with Roman times, so how do you explain the fact that Gloucester's called Glewum, built over a Roman city, and York was Ebor, and Cirencester Carinium? What about the roads, the long Roman roads that still exist today? What about the fact that a lot of our cathedrals started being built in the Norman era? There is a continuum, and quite frankly, when the Normans came over and the Vikings came over and mixed with the Angles and the Saxons and all the rest of it, and the Celts, that has remained fairly stable for 2,000 years, as well as the adoption of Christianity, which underpinned parliamentary democracy, it's actually coming up, by the way, to one of our big birthdays of England, thanks to good old Ethelred. So no, there is a continuum, can I just say, when it comes to civilization. At least I seem to think there is. OK, right, sorry, let's get off the ancient history and get on to matters today. Let's speak to Martin in Nottingham. Good morning, Martin.
Good morning. Yeah, Polanski, we all know he won't go to jail, will he? The rap singer at Glastonbury who incited the killing of Jews, he didn't go to prison, did he? Lucy Connolly went to prison for 31 months for saying, I don't care if bad things happen to a religious building. We know how it's going to go, don't we? If you know, certain sections will go to prison for things and certain sections will get away with it.
But what do we do about this? I mean, the thing is, the way I see it is people have been institutionally brainwashed for a couple of decades now, and those people who've been institutionally brainwashed with all of this sort of, you know, hope not hate style rubbish have now ended up in very senior positions in the judiciary, in the police, in politics, in the civil service, in the NHS, in whatever, you name it, in the teachings unions and all the rest of it. And we're kind of stuck with them. I mean, how do we wash this stuff out?
I think it's going to be unbelievably difficult, but going back to your last interview, unless Restore and Reform get their act together, we know that a coalition on the left will come together and take power in 2029 or sooner. Unless the right build as one, I think the country is completely finished, Alex, completely.
Oh, I'm minded to agree, but you know what's even more depressing, Martin? Even if we did happen to get a right wing of any colour, hue of rosette at the next election, whenever we might get that, and if they did manage to win, even with that in place, I just think the muscularity of the machine that whoever a right-minded Prime Minister would have to fight is going to be like pushing water up a hill. It's going to take a long time. There's going to be huge backlash. We've already got the Green Mayor of Lewisham, right, saying they wanted to set up sort of anti-ICE style protests like they've had in America, actually intercepting and blocking deportations. These people are often, I'm not saying this about this particular mayor, but certainly in America, the anti-ICE protests were coordinated with military precision and in league with some pretty scary militant entities like Antifa. And I'm afraid we've imported a lot of that stuff wholesale into the UK. So keep hold of your hats, folks. It ain't going to be an easy ride. Martin, thank you ever so much for your call. Let's speak now to Barry, who is in Norwich. Hi, Barry.
Yeah, the green city of Norwich in the East Anglian Angles.
Babe, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thoughts and prayers to you and yours.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah, I just want to make a comment on illegal immigration. It's quite funny actually. When you come through Heathrow Airport, they ask you if you're carrying any food or plants, and if you're carrying any food or plants that you're not allowed, they say it's not good for the ecosystem of the country.
Wow, it's a biohazard. Lord above, if you have like a Dairy Lee triangle in your suitcase, you're, you know, existentially threatening public health across an entire continent.
Yeah, and, you know, but we're allowing, like, thousands of undocumented young men to come across the English Channel, you know, and no one knows who they are, where they're coming from, or, you know, and even what illnesses or diseases they're carrying. Do you know what I mean? You know,
I know exactly what you mean. I made this comparison myself, actually, just the other day, using phyto and cyto standards as a sort of ridiculous comparator, that the EU is more concerned about if you happen to take a potato from Ireland into Northern Ireland than they are hundreds of thousands of would-be terrorists and rapists flooding our streets and not knowing where they're gone.
Yeah, exactly. It's just crazy. And, you know, I'd just like to say that on this Andy Burnham and his number 10 North or South or whatever it is, he's not actually talking about illegal immigration or the rape gang inquiries or anything like that, is he? No. I mean, this inquiry that was supposed to be happening, which Starmer said he was going to get up and running in January, was it? I mean, it's never been heard of, is it? Nothing's ever happened.
Well, no, and everything is so twisted now. It is so twisted that, you know, despite the fact that we know that there have been assassination attempts in America from radicalised members of the trans community, despite the fact there's this trans protest in London the other day where they're saying, you know, 90% of pigs are gassed. How come, you know, there are so many turfs alive and kicking or something like that? Despite the deeply distressing, harrowing murder of Anne Widdecombe, despite the fact that Nigel Farage has revealed how many death threats he gets, despite watching a big terror attack in Berlin, another one in Paris, learning that the IRGC has flooded our country with terror cells, you know, despite all of these things, we're still being made to believe that if we talk about them, we are the problem. Then there's got to be absolute inactivity because they've all bought into this idea that these are taboo subjects and aren't allowed to exist, even though they screamingly obviously do and pose the greatest threat existentially to our communities and our security and our personal safety and our prosperity and our peace. And I just don't... We live in a world that has become so baked in, this inversion of truth, this censoring of reality, this twisting of morality, this gaslighting, this brainwashing, that we're trapped in one giant mental health crisis. We seem to be living a daily quotidian psyop. And I don't know how we get out of it. I kind of want to do this and wake up. Because I don't, like, how has this happened? And how much worse is it going to get, and how much faster is it going to get worse? There you go, that's a cheery note to end on, isn't it, Barry? Thank you for your call, my darling. Listen, we're going to be taking an advert break now. I want to get more of your messages. Here's an interesting one. Reform is Bisto, restore is gravy powder. Yeah, right. I see what you've done there. Anyway, keep your messages coming in. It's wonderful to hear from you. But don't go anywhere. We're joined by Sir Ian Duncan-Smith just after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Those 2 hours have flown by, haven't they? They always do. You know, it's really nice to watch the clock tick down when you're having fun. And, you know, even if I'm talking about quite miserable subjects and bemoaning the dystopian nature of society and actually getting to the stage of desperation because I can no longer see light at the end of the tunnel, how merry is that? I still enjoy sitting here and doing it because I know I get to hang out with you, and that makes it all a bit easier. It's like the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down, and the medicine is definitely bitter tasting. And the medicine that had to be, you know, hard swallowed last night in the early hours of the morning when I woke up, couldn't sleep, knowing I had a really early morning alarm, and my brain was like, nah, come on, let's go, let's think. And I was like, shut up. And I lay there in bed, and I was actually just taking stock of everything. I really was. And I just thought, my goodness, we're in a very terrible state of affair. Terrible. I don't just mean economically. I don't just mean in terms of the porous borders. I don't mean in terms of this division in society between left and right, the tribalism, the disintegration of our civilization and our culture, all of those things. No, the thing that is freaking me out the most out of the lot of it is how it seems to me we have brainwashed an entire generation who are now getting into positions of authority, who are essentially extreme fascistic leftists, and you can see the manifestation of their ideology in real time, whether we're looking at the needless murder and death of Henry Novak, whether we're looking at the fact that, oh, well, it's okay to wear a T-shirt, suggesting that Nigel Farage should be executed. Meanwhile, people who said in the wake of the Southport riots, anything about anything ended up in prison. We're living through an era where the fact that there's been 2 big terror attacks in Europe and no one can even say the word Islam in connection with all of this. How do you get yourself out of that? Well, Elon Musk would call it the woke mind virus. How do we break out of that? You know, have we got to wait a generation, 2 generations? Because this stuff is insidious within our education system. That was this sort of horrible panic almost that I had late last night when I just thought, it doesn't even matter if there's a change at the top. I mean, it does. It would make a difference, and it would be very welcome, certainly by me. But the muscularity, the might of this madness, the Marxist madness, that whoever is in power is up against, the way that this stuff has infiltrated every single corner of public life and increasingly the private sector as well, that it's so... And we saw this, actually, frankly, with the previous Conservative government, open, close brackets, that there were things that they tried to do and they couldn't get it past the blob. And so you just think, is there a way out of the maze? I don't know. I'm worried I'm going to get lost in it forever. Oh, well, I'll go down smiling. Anyway, let's talk now. After that rather morose diatribe, let's speak to someone who might be able to cheer me up. You never know. So Ian Duncan-Smith, former Conservative Party leader, the greatest Prime Minister we never had, in my opinion. So Ian, thank you so much for coming back on the programme. It's always a delight to speak to you. Talk to me about your reaction to the man from Reform, the activist who wore a T-shirt with a guillotine saying, making plans for Nigel. Polanski's retweeted it, you know, apparently go, oh, it was an error. I didn't mean to remove the post. And everyone's like, yeah, that's fine. That's chill. Let's not worry about that. Except it's in stark contrast to how I think the legacy media would react and the political establishment would react if the boot was on the other foot.
Yeah, no, it's appalling. Zach Polanski, by posting it or retweeting it, owned it. He might as well have written it himself, drawn it himself, and worn the T-shirt. So he stands condemned by his malicious stupidity, I'm afraid, which has been going on for a long time, deceit and lies and all the rest of it. So all I would say is that there's no way he can weasel out of this and say that he didn't mean to. He clearly did, because he thought it was the right thing for this guy to do, was to wear a T-shirt, basically looking like he was calling for the execution of Nigel Farage. And we live in a world, I'm afraid, where social media posts, and if they're liked by people who are well known, can spread very fast. And who knows? We've just seen the murder of Anne Widdecombe, brutal murder, by the way, which we haven't seen the full videos of, but I have to tell you, I'm told, absolutely brutal, violent to the last degree. And there is a T-shirt being worn by somebody who is going to apparently put Nigel Farage in the guillotine. That is violent, and it incentivizes violence. The very idea that anybody in politics worth anything at all would ever retweet that is a shocker. And he really needs to be hauled up in front of the House of Commons when we return to explain himself at the bar of the House. He may not be a member, but we should call him to the bar of the House and say, unless you can explain yourself, then you should resign from the Green Party.
It seems to me, Ian, that we use such delicate, pretty little words to describe what is essentially left-wing tyranny in this country. You know, they get to use words such as politics of hate, division, fascism, neo-Nazis. All we get to use are the words two-tier, as if it's just something a little bit inconvenient. And yet it isn't, is it? Because on reflection, if you happen to be out about right-leaning politics in many walks of life, you will be actively punished in some way. At the very thin end of the wedge, it's ostracisation from certain social circles. At the furthest end, it is not getting a job promotion, having your business shut down, being cancelled, being debanked, potentially being attacked in the street. I mean, do you think I'm being hyperbolic by framing it in this way?
No, it's been like that for a while, and it's got worse. Most of these far left individuals, the left generally, gets away with a huge amount of abuse. Abuse which gets, people turn away from, they don't raise it too much. But you're right, all the list of the things they've attacked Conservatives for in the past has been appalling. And being accused of committing murder. Conservatives have been accused of making sure that everybody can be condemned to lifelong poverty, enjoying and the idea of harm, all this sort of stuff. And then the fascist, tag that goes with it. I've had that. We've all had it. Shouted, hurled of abuse. I don't really know Conservatives too often go down that line of abusing anybody, particularly other than in very political terms rather than in these hyperbolic terms that they use all the time. But that's been their modus operandi, to try and scare people, to try and frighten them, try and frighten those they want back on their side and frighten those that they're against. And
this is what I mean. I'm glad you used the word frighten. I'm glad you used the word frighten, because it seems to me this stuff has reached a crescendo because it's so baked in now into public life. You know, the fact that we've just come out the other side of a ridiculous, farcical, risible debate, quite frankly, over whether a man can have a penis or not, and actually pointing out that, well, no, whether a woman can have a penis, and actually pointing out, no, they can't, made you, persona non grata. I mean, it's got so baked in, I don't know how we flush it out. We've got to get this out. We have to rid ourselves from it. We spent most of the last century fighting communism, fighting extremism on the left. Now we have it sitting on the green benches. Now we have it in every single union. Now we have it running hospitals. Now we have it at the College of Policing. Now we have it in the civil service. It's everywhere. How do we get rid of this stuff, Ian? I mean, you are an expert when it comes to China. I'm sure a lot of this stuff and the sort of propagation and the exacerbation of it also has the long hand of hostile states involved as well. But, I want to know how we flush this out of the United Kingdom. Donald Trump has recently been doing a lot of speeches saying we've got to kill the cancer of communism in America, in the West. I think he's absolutely right. We've taken our eye off the ball and it has spread like wildfire. What do we do?
Well, we have to be against at every turn extremism in whatever form it has. We have religious extremism with some of these appalling individuals who have politicized and extreme views on Islam and threaten jihad whenever they get the opportunity. They should have no space in the country. And those that do the same in broader political terms, this whole business of cancel culture is astonishing. I mean, where did the idea of debate and discussion go? You can have a view. And if you had a view, by the way, on trans, and I remember saying as such early on, the first thing they want to do is to say you're cancelled. Nobody should go on your internet. Nobody should go on your Facebook. Nobody should ever communicate with you. The thing about these extremists is they don't like debate. They don't really like democracy. They don't like discussion. They like to impose their will on those who they do not actually run. And that is what's going on all the time in the UK, as I say, whether it's Islamic extremism, whether it's far left extremism, whether it's angry people on the internet. They're all in the same category in my book. They're people who try to inculcate fear amongst others and then shut down those who are rational and wish to say, no, I'm not prepared to be cancelled or shut down by you. So the threats go on. You know, I've had death threats in the past, just like a lot of other politicians. I've been assaulted. You know, all this stuff goes on. And the trouble right now is it seems like there is no punishment for people that do that because they get let off by the courts.
Well, there's no punishment if it's the left doing it to the right. That is the difference,
well,
that's
always been the case that everybody has to make apologies for the left view of the world. But when it comes to conservatives, everything you utter apparently is about the destruction of others. Just appalling, really, when you think of our history. And it goes on. And the truth is, we should never, ever accept that we should be silenced, cancelled, or tried to be squeezed out of the arena by violent people whose whole raison d'etre is to make you fear for your future, your families, and your children. The moment they do that, we are back to what happened in the 1930s. We're back to the rise of extreme politics to the degree that stamps on other people's throats, gets rid of organizations. Look at the anti-Semitism on the rise in the United Kingdom. That is a shocking outcome. A country that was democratic and free and welcoming to those who needed to run from persecution is now turned into a ghastly hate march every Saturday where they spout brutal bile at everybody, and that should be stopped. And it's our own fault. We should crack down on this and say there is no room for this kind of hate speech or those sort of marches that inculcate hate and fear.
I agree. I think we should criminalise DEI, criminalise critical race theory. I'd get rid of a lot of it. I think it all needs flushing out. I think it's toxic. But what concerns me is, you know, bless my compatriots, they're an optimistic folk. They seem to be quite beguiled by the sort of mawkish, memeified, moronic mayor of Great Britain, despite the fact he's an emoji who doesn't really want to speak to us or be accountable. Andy for us in his black T-shirt. That's all that's needed for a Burnham Bounce. What do you make of this latest polling? I mean, I would imagine pragmatically the honeymoon period won't last very long, but it always leaves me incredulous that so many people out there sort of spoon-fed pure sugar and think it's a wholesome diet.
Yeah, well, there you have it. So the reality is that this is a guy that's had no interrogation, who hasn't appeared in the House of Commons, has never taken a question from journalists, does little nice cozy chats with individual selected journalists, makes speeches and never takes questions, and then makes announcements. For example, he was going to cut energy bills for people. And he said, right, we've got the money because we're not going to use the money that was laid aside for the ID cards thing, the digital ID. Only to find that the ex-chief at the Treasury told him that we never allocated any money for that in the first place. So bingo, we've got an announcement yet again with no money attached. Not one mention of how they're going to reduce the over and gross welfare expenditure that is rising like mad and condemning young people to a perpetual life without work. You know, it's a desperate situation, but there's nothing. They can't because the Labour Party voted against it last time. You go on and on and on. There's a list of things that Andy Burnham has yet to say, this is how we're going to do it. We float in with an idea from the Netherlands. Oh, excellent. We're going to help all young people, you know, get work experience. How? Right. How are you going to do that? They have a wholly different system. I went to visit it. All their schools do work experience. Every day they learn each other's excellences. So somebody who's a brilliant idea in academics and others who's brilliant with their hands, they all have to do the same studies as each other, but they specialize. You know, that takes a whole shake-up and will be very expensive. Fine, great. But where's the money coming from? When's he going to put a plan forward? You know, it's great. Make people feel warm by being nice, saying nice things, travel around, don't get questioned, so no difficult bits arise, And the fact that Starmer was so unpopular is bound to give him a nudge up because he's not Starmer. Anybody who's not Starmer and wasn't involved in the Labour government, which he hasn't been, is going to be a little bit more popular. But when you get down to the grind of government, this is where it all changes. If you can't make those figures add up, you will be eaten alive by your own backbenchers in due course. And that's the test for him, as and when we are allowed to question him.
As and when, exactly. I mean, this is what is so frightful about the entire situation, because we're having leaked out very left-wing policies. I mean, you know, by the time he's renationalised all the utilities, although we can't afford that, by the time he's turned everything into one giant devolution project and we're zoned communist style, you know, we're all going to be Winston Smith. There will be no jobs other than working for Big Brother. And yet, like you said, there he is up in Manchester with his hemp knitting circle. No one can ask him a question. At the same time, we've got the IRGC making a direct terror threat against RAF Fairford, against the royal family. We've got an economic crisis looming. We've got an energy crisis looming. I mean, how are we sort of part of this sort of communist coup while they're sort of, you know, using emojis and memes over here and videos of saying what my favourite pub snack is, and everyone's just sitting back going, yeah, that's all right, weather's good, isn't it?
Well, that's exactly where he was always going to be right now, because if you're not going to be examined, if you're not going to take questions, if you cannot be tested, you know, the fact that a guy puts out a policy which he says is costed, only to find there's no money in it at all, doesn't ask the question. If you're a leader, you have to ask questions. You have to interrogate, find out first what you're about to say is actually sensible and stands up. He hasn't done that. It's been altogether too easy. This has been the problem. The British people are now being involved in a mass deception by the Labour Party. They all decided they didn't want to have a contest. They were going to get Andy Burnham. So Andy Burnham, without any debate, no questions, has been slipped into Downing Street. And he's been enabled because they did it very carefully timed so that they go into the summer recess. So the House doesn't sit again till early September. So all the time he can traipse around the country saying nice things to people about nice affairs that he's going to make come true. And so, of course, you're going to get people go, oh, well, that sounds a bit better. Sounds like he's going to be doing something. The question is, when you do it, does it work? Or can you do it? And those are the big questions that are going to have to be asked of him. And he'll have to be tested.
Did you not think? I mean,
the media really needs to get after him on this, not let him get away with the idea, you know, that he is able to say what he likes, and then everyone goes, "Oh, look, he's had a bounce." Well, no wonder he's had a bounce because newspapers and others have been unable to get their hands on him. But I think the one thing about our system is, you know, the law of political gravity moves in very soon, and he'll find himself with feet of clay, I think, in a very short time.
Do you think, I mean, that Kemi Badenoch has come out and suggested that Parliament needs to be recalled for emergency legislation to stop the release of violent prisoners, because that will come to pass when recess ends and there won't be any time to actually reverse the legislation that is enabling this to take place. I mean, surely we've got a new Prime Minister. He doesn't seem to have any democratic recourse. You know, there's no mandate for him, frankly, to come out with some of the things he's coming out with. Do we need to start looking at this? Because, you know, this isn't the first time we've had a switch at the top, and I know we're a parliamentary, you know, party democracy system, but everything's being run as presidential campaigns now. And do you think it's about time that we said, look, if you're going to change a person at the top, if the Prime Minister changes, there needs to be a general election, or if leadership changes, Parliament's going to have to be recalled. We can't just have this sort of, you know, we're a G7 economy, for crying out loud, not a banana republic.
No, I agree completely, and that's why I said earlier on that this has been carefully stage managed by the Labour Party. You know, just to make sure that they give their man a full free ride for as long as possible before the ghastly Parliament gets him. All I'm saying is I'm dying for Kemi to get him at the dispatch box, because then you will see just exactly how much somebody knows. And, you know, Starmer was no fool, but Kemi completely wrecked his whole persona, because what her job to do is to ask the questions that nobody else seems to want to ask. And so that's all been avoided for just over a month now, and we're going to have to wait and see. She's right, by the way, that we have a crisis on our hands, We are now borrowing at record levels, and the worst thing about it is we're taxing at record levels. You have youth unemployment, NEETs now of over 1 million. Why? Because nobody can afford to employ them, because the stupid previous Chancellor introduced national insurance charges on part-time work. That meant they dropped from 9,000 starting point a year to 5,000. That means part-time work, charity work, nobody can afford to pay for them. And so the result is all the people that might have got into work experience are not. So they're all NEET, and the NEET level is growing. Youth unemployment is rising, because the jobs aren't available. Then you see the other day that we're now way down on the number of millionaires in the UK. Well, it's not about the millionaires, it's about what they put back in. These are the guys that start businesses, invest in companies. They're all going. They're going to Italy and other places that have redesigned their whole system around our previous successful non-dom policy, which kept these people here, and they invested in Britain. Now we are not the most invested in by America, which we always were previously, and that is where our problem arises. You cannot do all of these things, Mr. Burnham, if you don't have a working economy, if you have tax at a reasonable level, not the level it's at the moment, and if you don't realize that actually you cannot tax your way out of a problem, because people, mostly those on middle incomes, get hammered by your tax changes, and they won't be putting money in, they won't be buying things, and many will be leaving the country.
Many have already left the country, and many more will go. It is indeed true. If only someone could go to America and kidnap Art Laffer and bring him over here to sort us out. So Ian Duncan-Smith, thank you ever so much. I always love interviewing you. Big, big fan. OK, we're going to be taking a short break. Now, the big news of the latest sort of Burnhamism that's been announced today, as Ian was talking about there, is this idea of moving people towards technology, a technical education, as opposed to an academic education. But, you know, some of us are designed to do practical things. Others of us are designed to do, well, boffiny stuff, really. Is this going to work? But especially as when you've got porous borders, an open labour market, if you're not able to create jobs at the lowest rung of the ladder in those practical professions, in the trades, what hope does any of this have anyway? Or should we be talking about, I don't know, bringing back grammar schools because not all children are made the same? Or would that be too unfair? We're going to be discussing that, but also a topic that is really, I know it sounds silly, but it's really peed me off, which is we're closing Jodrell Bank. We're closing Jodrell Bank. Cost £2 million. That is half a day of housing illegals in hotels. Half a day of what was once the sort of jewel in the crown of British space investigation, the most famous satellite. It used to be a sort of beginning of news reports and stuff. It was an iconic structure. In America, there you have almost every other day Elon Musk chucking something into space, or Jeff Bezos or NASA. Us? Oh, we'd rather pay for Mohammed and a lot of them to come over from Syria and be put in an HMO than we would actually having any sort of living science in this country. It is the most depressing thing I have read in a while. I'm not saying something. We're going to be catching up with the award-winning teacher, Stephen James, on those topics after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Do you know, there's been a sort of debate going on the fringes of politics for a while now that perhaps the Elysian fields of education were when we had good polytechnics connected to the car industry, where we had some people who were encouraged to go into the trades and use their practical skills and their pragmatism in order to, frankly, make a fortune. At one point, I remember when I was at school, the careers advisor saying to me, you want to earn a lot of money, become a plumber. And they weren't half wrong. But then, of course, we opened up the borders to every last plumber, builder, welder, carpenter, electrician from Central and Eastern Europe, and people suddenly find their wages compressed. But there was also an argument back then of, you know, some people should be the ones going in to study academic subjects. They might be mathematical geniuses, and by gum, we're going to need those in things like the development of AI, for instance. But also, interestingly, I can't remember who it was, but it is someone from AI, or that world, someone from the sort of emergent new Silicon Valley industries, who said that they actively are trying to recruit philosophy graduates. Philosophy graduates, that's what I studied, actually. But, you know, once upon a time, oh, well, what's that all about then? How is that helpful? I'll tell you what, it's actually very helpful in just being clever about being clever, about being able to argue and reason and balance, interrogate and investigate any subject, whether it be political philosophy, whether it be literary philosophy, music philosophy, whether it be metaphysics, quantum physics. Philosophy actually just means love of knowledge. And for a long time, it's why we get a PhD in science, by the way, because everyone studied philosophy. You know, some people go, oh, René Descartes, philosopher. Well, actually invented the lens and the X-Y axis, so was he a mathematician? People go to Isaac Newton, scientist. But actually, it was a philosophical pursuit in reasoning around the concept that there could be a force called gravity. So the two have always been intertwined. So is Burnham's vision of just trying to get as many people as possible not to go to university anymore, but, I don't know, picking up a hammer and sickle, haha, mind the pun, actually practical? How is AI going to affect things like this? And then also we will talk about the closure of Jodrell Bank. I'm joined now by Stephen James, who's an award-winning teacher. Stephen, do you know, I was saying to a friend the other day who have a son who is doing A-levels, and I was just saying, how on earth do you advise kids today on what sort of route to take at all in education? Because it's hard to imagine what the jobs market's going to be what's going to look like, whether AI is going to replace the entire legal profession, for example. Where Andy Burnham's looking at this and saying what we need are people who are able to do physical work, practical work, operate in the trades and tie that to industry. I mean, there's potentially some common sense in that.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think I broadly agree with the kind of vision, but he's carrying on from, you know, great work that Robert Halfon was doing in the previous parliaments, who's been constantly championing, you know, this kind of route into work, but also in education. And, you know, I think I want to say I'm a victim of Tony Blair's, you know, constant push for universities. I think back in 2002. I went into Cardiff University, absolutely unprepared for it. I'm from a council estate, you know, and it was that constant push. You know, we want to get somebody who's on free school meals into this university because this is what we're being judged on. And absolutely, you know, failed miserably, didn't enjoy the first year, ended up going back to default, which was joining the army. And that put me on the straight and narrow. And when I left, then I went back to university, went back to my studies. But this idea that there's an academic route, there's a technical route, I think is a bit of a fallacy in itself. It's a bit of a fixed way of thinking, because every single technical or trade profession is underpinned by English, by maths, by science, by philosophy. All these things are crucial. If you want a good tradesman, they're people who understand, you know, it's cross-disciplinary. So, you know, I think, yes, he's right to kind of change the conversation, the narrative. But I think what we're seeing now is a kind of, you know, the back end of Tony Blair's mistake, which was constantly pushing this.
It seems to me that social mobility today is probably worse than ever before. I count myself as a great beneficiary of social mobility because I got to go to a grammar school. I grew up in Gloucester, where we still have 4 grammar schools. No one's been able to shut those down. And Gloucester, by and large, is a city that doesn't have a huge amount of money. It has some pretty ghettoised communities. But it's enabled kids who probably otherwise would not have been able to go to the Russell Group universities or Oxbridge, access to those institutions. And yet it seems to me now that, you know, you go into the BBC. Once upon a time, look, I'm a trained journalist. I went to journalism school, OK, after university. I did my postgrad at Cardiff, actually, as it happens to be. But once upon a time, it wasn't professionalised. You could leave school at 16, be an apprentice, be a hack, which is why people like Kelvin Mackenzie, Rod Liddle and Jeremy Clarkson managed to get into journalism. And guess what? Those people who are from quite ordinary sort of working or lower middle class families tend to have right-wing attitudes. Have we got an issue that sort of it's a result of this Blairism, the universityfication of everything, that we've ended up with this glut of leftism in our institutions, people who aren't necessarily practical, who don't share the worldview of most of the people they essentially serve? And do we need to actually reopen the debate about good old grammar schools? I mean, certainly Manchester has a few.
Let me address those two things. Firstly, I think where Blair's vision came from, and it was utterly patronising, I thought, as a young person growing up, thinking that, you know, I needed to be kind of, you know, mollycoddled by the state through into university. And, you know, and I think the way that Burnham's talking now about kind of people feeling ashamed of not going to university, I think, again, is, you know, it isn't quite right or fits with reality. I mean, I think he went to one of the best universities in the UK as well. So, you know, that has to change. We have to change that kind of national conversation. But, you know, on grammar schools, I think that, again, that underpins the kind of where we're putting education and how we value education. I'm a huge fan of selective education. I live down here in Kent, and we've still got grammar schools here too. But when I talk about selective education, I'm not just talking about academic selection. I'm talking about sport. I'm talking about music. I'm talking about maths and science and all those things that children can be great at. Great, go to one of those schools where they select for that skill and that you can refine it and you can have the best teachers in those subjects sat in those schools as well, teaching those children. And they can bounce off each other and get even better, which I think would be a great way to kind of position education. But, you know, you won't get that past the kind of lefties who want to, you know, have a race to the bottom, ultimately.
We've got some of the best universities in the world. I think about 25 of the world's top 100 are UK universities. It's a massive overrepresentation when it comes to our academic institutions. And yet, when you look at the UK, where is the big AI boom? You know, where is the social media? Where's the Silicon Valley? Where is everything? It's not translating into the real world. And I feel like sort of emblematic of all of this is the closure of Jodrell Bank. To me, it sort of is the personification's not the right word, but it's the embodiment of this complete lack of application of human resource, of intellectual capability, of academic potential into real-world results.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're seeing is brain drain. Our best people are going off to the US, off to Silicon Valley to ply their trade and earn mega bucks. And, you know, I don't blame them. But what we're seeing, and you're absolutely right, things, you know, infrastructure that actually inspires people, and young people look at that and go, you know, wow, how can I go and look into the universe? How can I go and explore, you know, the world around me? And it's closing down. It sends absolutely the wrong message. So, you know, I would absolutely back, you know, state funding for that, but also trying to get some more funding through the private sector as well, because you look at people like Elon Musk, and you know, the impact he's having on the world. And you talk about AI, and that's going to change everything for us. And we're talking now about jobs and young people. I actually think it is the trades that are going to skyrocket at the moment. The guy in charge of NVIDIA, he basically said the trades that will still be around are plumbers, your electricians, you know, your tradesmen, your carpenters. All those people are still going to be about, whilst we're all reaping the benefits of ChatGPT.
Stephen, thank you ever so much. It's been great to have a conversation with you about this today. And just before we go to the break, I want to say hi, Elon. Hiya. I know you like hanging out on X, and if this post gets edited down and put on X, I've got a favour to ask you from the British people. You do a lot of great things with space. You bought Twitter. That was a big price tag, wasn't it? Well, for yours, for only 2 million quid, one of the biggest satellites that's been exploring space for over 70 years. It's going for a song, Jodrell Bank. Think of it. That could be your little SpaceX domain in the United Kingdom. It's only 2 million quid. I'm sure that's like the interest you make on a minute's basis with your sort of trillionaire projects that you have going on. Would you think about it? Please, Elon, we want to see Jodrell Bank saved. It's only 2 million quid. Please help. Love the British people. Thank you. OK, we're going to take a short break now, but when we come back... OK, so there's been changes in Cabinet. We have a new Defence Secretary in the guise of Wes Streeting. John Healey, who stood down because he said the Defence Investment Programme wasn't going far enough, was at least 10 bills short of where it needed to be. Well, he's now the Chancellor, so he is going to have to sort of play with his abacus over summer and see what he can do to help our armed forces. But... the big question is, will the witch hunt now end? The witch hunt against veterans from Northern Ireland during the Troubles. The witch hunt that was being led by our own Prime Minister and his Attorney General, who did all that stuff pro bono, going after our brave men and women who served during that period of time. It's an interesting question. It's an important question. We'll try and answer it after this break.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. And let's go straight now to Lieutenant Colonel Richard Williams, former Commanding Officer of 22 Unit SAS. Thank you so much for joining us. You've written a brilliant article today about how you commanded the SAS, but essentially, it seems to me, our elites want to see them, well, over. Talk to me about this.
Well, I think it connects to a lot of things. Resourcing is a popular one at the moment, but if we move to, I think, something far more fundamental, that's represented by what is generally called witch hunts against veterans that have done their duty in Northern Ireland, Iraq, Afghanistan, or elsewhere. It goes to that. The idea that volunteers who are trained to the peak of military capability that face lethal terrorists toe to toe, who deal with them at the time, be it in the 1970s, 80s, or even more recently, are suddenly exposed to the retrospective application of human rights law, judging their actions in ways that are just completely inappropriate to the combat situation. What you have is, as I put in that article, the defanging or the declawing or the crippling of essential military capability that you have to throw into the combat zone to deal with those whose only interest is murder.
I mean, it's one word I like that you've used, and many words I like to use, by the way. You talk about the continued feminisation of defence, and I find that so pertinent. This idea that war somehow must now be woke. We've got the Red Arrows running on biofuel. Oh, great, yeah, let's tackle climate change with fast jets. It seems a bit crazy, but and this whole idea that wow, we can't have any more white men flying those aeroplanes. You know, they seem to cause a lot of trouble defending our skies. And at the same time, we're looking at Vladimir Putin, who is recruiting an extra 500,000 poor sods to go into his meat grinder. Talk to me about that as well, and how all of this sort of woke DEI gender rubbish is having a dampening effect on, well, like you said, people who need to be pretty masculine, pretty brave, pretty tough, trained fighters, happy to pick up a gun, happy to fire it.
Yeah, and I think the feminization of defense is a rhetorical tool. It doesn't mean that women don't have a place in our armed forces or don't have a place in the combat zone. What it means is the way in which, as you said, woke language or fashion has moved the military away from its purpose, which is to fight and win the nation's wars by the destruction of its enemies. It means that combat has moved from being the central focus of our defense forces into some kind of social program where a whole bunch of other agendas are put in, perhaps in the one hand to improve recruiting and sustainability, but on the other drift us away from that which the Ukrainians know very, very well today is the lethal business of destroying those enemies that seek to threaten you, seize your territory, or rip your own guts out. The language is deliberately tough in the military because the purpose of the military has to be that way. So those that seek to distort the concept of feminization of defense for a gender purpose is misunderstanding what we're saying here, or what I'm saying here. What I'm saying here is the sole purpose of defense is to fight for the country in the most desperate circumstances, and you must organize yourself accordingly.
And has there been, do you think, a huge sort of downtick in recruitment and retention over in Herefordshire?
Well, I think the thing that's really knocking the SAS right now is their faith in the chain of command to support them after they've conducted these actions legally. Because right now what happens is our enemies, be they Iranian-sponsored or others, are able to use human rights legislation and the lawyers that make their business creating cases from that in the UK to bring cases against veterans that have kept us safe in Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill that we don't know yet what the current Prime Minister and his government is going to push through. And also connected to that is the ongoing inquiries and investigations into actions subsequently in places like Afghanistan that are yet to produce a single piece of prosecutorial evidence. Yeah. That's what kills recruiting. Imagine going out or retention. Imagine going out, I say day by day, to be that level of frequency is unusual, but in campaigns like Iraq, Afghanistan, it is valid. But going out to deal with lethal enemies, and in dealing with them, unfortunately, lethal means are used, and then you're spending the rest of your life answering for what was a legitimate operation in courts, facing people who were generating accusations or insights that actually just simply won't stand up over the long term. But it becomes a persecution by process. So if you've got to face that, why would you stay?
In terms of resourcing as well, is that an issue? I'll tell you, I'll let you into a little secret here, Richard, which is that I had begun the process of signing up as a reservist in intelligence and with the RAF. And I had got fairly far down the process, and all of a sudden I saw what went on when Starmer went, you can't use UK air bases to America, when we couldn't get HMS Dragon over to Akrotiri, and we had to depend upon Spain and Greece and France to go and help defend it. And I just went, OK, I'm sticking a pin in that application. It put me off. It put me off. I'd imagine a lot of other people looking at the armed forces have heard so much negative press about the lack of looking after veterans, the fact that the Ajax tanks will break your spine, the fact that, you know, they're armed with things that frankly don't pass muster, and are going, well, you know, this doesn't look like as much fun as I thought it would be.
Well, from my perspective, I think service, obviously, because it was a big part of my life in the armed forces on behalf of the country, benefits both oneself and one's country over the very long term. So it's up to you, of course, but I'd move the politics out of it, and I'd have a good look at it. However, your point is a really good one. If what happens is by my involvement in the military, I'm creating legal jeopardy for myself in some way. If you're working intelligence, am I somehow connected to something that someone downstream, my enemies sponsoring a UK lawyer, can bring me and my friends to court? Why would I do it? Policies in terms of what war we get involved with change all the time. And again, as a SAS man, I worked with conservative governments, Labour governments. It's not really the political issue. We as a country make a choice, and our elected officials make a choice as to which wars we get involved with. I have different opinions occasionally from the government, but that isn't the issue. The issue is if we're not resourcing defence, giving it the money that it needs, and if we're not ensuring they've got the legal basis to do their serious business on our behalf, then we haven't got a defence force. We've got a gendarmerie that looks good, that can do certain things, but can't fight and win our wars.
Yeah, I agree. It's we've got to get real about defence. I just can't see it happening because much like a lot of things that Andy Burnham doesn't talk about, there doesn't seem to be any sort of real ambition to interrogate the topic. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Williams. OK, right, this brings us neatly up to the last bit of the programme, which is always your bit. So if you want to get in touch, 0344 499 1000, roll up, it's the last chance. We're going to be doing calls just after this.
The UK on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Right, let us dive feet first into the phone lines because we've got Chris in Manchester up. Hi, Chris.
Hi, good afternoon, Alex. I was very interested with your debate with Tom Slater earlier, and I think sort of sanity was achieved in terms of what Polanski said or what he retweeted. It's most certainly offensive, but I think in a society where we expect to have the right to free speech, there has to be a right to offend. And I think that's what he's done. I think he's been offensive as opposed to doing anything criminal. And the concept of sort of two-tier justice and the sort of trying to compare with the Lucy Connolly case, I think is a false dichotomy, really, because realistically, Lucy should probably never have been charged with that in the first place. But I certainly don't support the idea of two wrongs making a right. I don't think it would be right to investigate Polanski. I feel someone at the Metropolitan Police or whoever is leading this investigation should have a very early look at the case and say, nothing to see here, let's not waste any more police time, let's move on. Polanski's damaged politically, probably permanently, and I suspect he'll be replaced within the next 12 months. And the achievement of essentially removing their threat as a credible electoral threat has now been achieved by him, because obviously people can see right through him, and to conduct a criminal inquiry just seems petty point scoring. Let's just get on with it and let things take their course.
But do we need to at least have a national conversation about this whole idea that the left wing have invented a mythical far right that apparently is, creates the biggest existential threat to society, and yet points to me that the element of far right terrorism that's taken place, point to me the example of someone from the far right going and beating people up, and the skinheads marching on the streets, and the brown shirts accumulating in shopping centres or wherever, because I just can't seem to see it. It seems to be an act of fiction. Yet what I can see is one particular party leader having far more death threats than anybody else. What I have seen is assassination attempts on Donald Trump. What I have seen is the murder of Charlie Kirk. What I have seen is my former colleague Anne Widdecombe no longer with us. And so I have to ask you, though, I agree with you, by the way. I think that this whole sort of stupid, time-wasting, risible exercise of involving police in these matters is stupid. They need to go out and go after practical physical crimes, violent crimes, rapes, burglaries, all of those things. But similarly, at the same time, there is I would say, a far-left terrorism emerging, and as stupid as that activist is with that stupid T-shirt, it buys into a narrative that is becoming, I would say, harrowingly prevalent.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about how these things are reported, not necessarily what they are. And we have to accept that there is a left-leaning bias in the media in this country, and we've got to try and find a way past that. But just slightly off the point in terms of, we were speaking earlier about the prison population. I did a little bit of research. There are upwards of 900 people currently serving short terms of imprisonment, i.e. 12 months or less, for social media, Facebook-type, X-type posts. I mean, you could release those immediately, because my own view is that they're likely to pose no threat whatsoever to the public. They're just a little bit of an annoyance, and I think we have to try and manage that, and at the same time release a number of prison places so that the proper criminals remain incarcerated.
Oh, I agree, Chris. I think the whole country would agree, but common sense, unfortunately, is becoming all too much uncommon. Chris in Manchester, thank you very much. Let's speak to Joe, who's in gorgeous Sussex. Hello, Joe.
Hi, hello. Hi.
Hi, what's on your mind?
Right, I was listening to your show earlier in the car, actually, and to your editor there, whatever, and I'm a Reform member, but it's coming to a point now that no matter who you get in power, it just seems that the civil service are probably running the show. I feel. I mean, you're my favourite, by the way, on the radio. Very articulate, great. Actually, I like listening to you. But the thing is, Andy Berman never mentioned anything about the migrants. He's going on about a load of rubbish, to be quite honest with you. Yeah. And I feel I go to the Reform meetings in Brighton, which are not far from where I live, and I just think we're up against it. If there was an election tomorrow, we wouldn't be anywhere, actually, to be honest. We haven't got enough people, to be quite honest with you. And this thing about the polls, where do they get those polls from? That Labour are in front now all of a sudden. Who are they?
They do field surveys, which is normally done telephonically. Things can be done online. I haven't actually looked into the methodology of that particular poll to see what process they use, but there's all sorts of rules governing how you do the polling in terms of sample size, whether someone's prompted, how you weight it, and so polls may differ in terms of how one applies the methodology and how one garners the public feedback, but there are sort of rules that govern the art form, if you will, of polling. But this particular one, I couldn't answer you, but it is a verified pollster, and it wouldn't surprise me actually to see a Burnham bounce, because that is, I predicted it. It is it's commonplace in politics, and it's going to be an interesting summer. But believe you me, I think when Parliament comes back, when it's back to school in September and rubber has to come into contact with tarmac, I think things will change inexorably. But perhaps actually, Andy Burnham ruling out a quick election would be quite beneficial for reform. Based upon what you say, it sounds as if you think the party wouldn't be ready to fight the ballot box right now.
No, I wouldn't be, but I feel like giving up sometimes. I mean, I've lost friends and family through the last 5 years because they think I'm far right, and they're quite nasty actually as well. It seems that these lefty people are nasty people actually. To be quite weird.
I'll tell you what, old Joe or young Joe. My Joe. I left the BBC because it was way too woke back in 2009 and went and joined UKIP back then. And so then my friends decided to self-select. They all abandoned me. And then also because, you know, I was effectively cancelable, couldn't exactly go back into the BBC or ITV or any of those lovey-dovey legacy broadcasters, having come out as a righty. So my career path has ended up being entirely right-wing stuff because I wouldn't be allowed into left-wing stuff. And so now I don't even have any left-wing friends, and it's blimmin' wonderful. Way!
So I have to say that if I listen to you for too long, I have to do some meditation afterwards because I mean, you're brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But you know, you give all this information out, and sometimes it's just too much information, and ignorance becomes bliss. Actually,
I know what you mean. Do you know what? This is why God invented sports that involve maiming and violence. Go watch a bit of motorsport or rugby, and you feel all the better for it. Joe, thank you ever so much. Hello, Mr. Collins.
Hello.
Hello.
Do you know what? I won't name the show, because if I name the show, I'll identify the person, but it was on the BBC, and I used to get booked for this show once in a while. And the guy that had a very, very senior position in the BBC, in the sort of, shall we say, political arena, was arguably the most right-wing man I've ever met in my life.
I know who the guy is.
However...
Because there's only one.
Yeah,
yes.
There's
only one, and he's always cited in the newspapers as being some sort of anomaly, some evil corrupter on the BBC board.
But what he was very good at
because he's the only righty.
But I did used to work with a producer in local BBC as well, who was very left, but she was very... I never had Nigel Farage on more than I did under her watch, because she was always very like, you've got to get him on, you've got to get him on. And I used to think, fair play to you, mate, you know, that's how it should be. And the other guy I'm referring to kind of did the same, but I think sometimes went too far the other way. So in order to sort of ward off any criticism that he was some sort of mad Brexiteer that was hatching plans.
I think it's funny that the only